Chapter 55. Walking along the street, Lin soon also found that many eyes were looking at him along the way, and some of them had a trace of greed that couldn't be concealed. Lin soon was clear that the huge hide bag on his horse was indeed too eye-catching. If it were an experienced veteran, he would be able to tell what was hidden in it by just looking at it. Just by sniffing it, he would know the quality of the goods and how much they were worth. Plus, he was alone with a horse, so he naturally couldn't stop some people from peeping. Suddenly, there was a commotion in the crowd in the distance, attracting many onlookers. When Lin soon arrived, he saw a man in animal skin had no time to dodge, and his head was cut off by a practitioner with a saber. Blood splashed out, which was extremely horrifying. Seeing this, the onlookers not only didn't panic, but also cheered loudly, as if they were watching a good show. "How dare you steal from me? You're courting death. Bah!" The practitioner put away his saber, glanced at the body on the ground, and swaggered away. This was murder in the street. But no one stopped him. Obviously, people here had long been used to this kind of thing. Before long, two figures dressed as guards hurriedly cleaned up the headless body and took it away. In just a moment, the street returned to its previous liveliness, as if the murder had not happened at all. Seeing this, Lin soon couldn't help but squint. He had roughly seen that there were no rules in the Green Sun tribe at all. To establish a foothold here, a strong force was an indispensable condition. Not long after, Lin soon saw two groups of people fighting in the street, seemingly for a batch of goods, but they were soon stopped by a passing practitioner. The way he stopped them was also very rough. He directly killed two people, and the fact that he used blood to frighten the crowd, instantly resolving the dispute. Under the prosperity, there must be a dirty undercurrent. Lin soon suddenly remembered the words of a prisoner imprisoned in the mine prison. At that time, he was still young and didn't understand the meaning of these words. But now walking in the Green Sun tribe, looking at the greedy eyes hidden under the prosperous atmosphere, Lin soon instantly understood the meaning of this sentence. But Lin soon was not afraid. Along the way, he had roughly judged that compared with those ordinary people, the number of practitioners was obviously very small, and most of them were in the martial realm. Few practitioners in the gang spirit realm could be seen. If someone dared to covet his goods, Lin soon wouldn't mind giving him an unforgettable lesson. Unfortunately, Lin seemed to be lucky today. Even though he noticed many greedy eyes along the way, no one came out to make trouble. The sky darkened and night fell. Lin soon stopped in front of a building called Old Crow Inn. He threw 2 copper coins to the waiter and asked him to take care of the scaly horse. Lin soon himself entered the inn. He planned to go to Keystone Business to exchange materials tomorrow morning. There were many tables set up on the first floor of the inn, and it seemed to be extremely bustling at this moment. Many figures sat there eating, drinking, and chatting loudly, causing it to seem rather noisy. The boss was a huge one-eyed man with a rather ferocious face. At this time, he was drinking lazily. When they saw Lin soon walk in, the eyes of many people in the inn lit up, and they all fell on the huge animal skin bag that was as tall as a man in Lin soon's hand. When they saw Lin soon's face clearly, there was undisguised greed in many people's eyes. But there were also some people who withdrew their eyes sensibly. It was very eye-catching that a 13-year-old boy dared to appear here alone with an animal skin bag weighing hundreds of kilograms. As long as they were not stupid, they would know that this boy should be a ruthless character. "Stay in the inn?" the huge one-eyed man sitting behind the counter asked absent-mindedly. "Stay in the inn." Lin soon smiled and nodded. 20 copper coins a night. The huge one-eyed man glanced at Lin soon. As soon as his voice fell, many people burst into laughter. "One-eyed, are you ripping off customers again? Don't you know how you lost your eye?" The huge one-eyed man ignored the laughter and just looked at Lin soon without explaining anything from beginning to end. "Okay." Lin soon took out 20 copper coins and handed them over. "Where's the room?" "It's yours tonight." The huge one-eyed man raised his hand and pointed to the corner of the second floor. Then he took the flagon and drank lazily. Lin Sun smiled. "Thank you." He turned around and walked upstairs with the animal skin bag. Watching Lin Sun's figure walking into the room, a drunk fat man suddenly came to the counter and said, "This is a rare little fat sheep. He has enough goods, at least this amount." As he said, he stretched out 4 fingers and gestured in front of the huge one-eyed man. The huge one-eyed man seemed to be unaware of this and continued to drink. After a long time, he squinted at the fat man and said, "Fatty Shio, you have been in the Green Sun tribe for almost 6 years, haven't you? Do you plan to stay here for the rest of your life?" Shio's face suddenly changed. "What do you mean?" The huge one-eyed man sighed and said, "Listen to me, don't worry about it. That boy is not to be trifled with." After thinking for a while, he added, "No, he's not to be trifled with." Shio's expression changed. After a long time, he said with a wry smile, "I see." He turned around and left. The huge one-eyed man squinted and watched Shio walk out of the inn. He had said what he wanted to say. As for whether the fat man understood, it was none of his business. The huge one-eyed man picked up his cup and looked at the ripples on the amber wine, murmuring, "It's not peaceful recently." At the same time, in the Wu business. As one of the leading businesses in the Green Sun tribe, the Wu business was rich and powerful. Its boss was said to be a big shot in the Donglin town of the empire. In the darkness of the night, the hall of the backyard of the Wu business was brightly lit. Wu Deong sat in the main seat with a gloomy face and said nothing. He was sent to the Green Sun tribe to take charge of the operation of the Wu business. He was about 40 years old, in the prime of his life. As a member of the clan of Wu in the Donglin town, he had reached the 7th level of the martial realm and was a well-known figure in the Green Sun tribe. Below Wu Deong sat a group of stewards of the business. At this moment, they all looked silent and did not dare to make a sound. So far, it has been more than 3 days since the deadline agreed with the great deacon Wu Henshui. So far, no news has been sent back. What do you think of this matter? Wu Deong said in a low voice, breaking the dead silence in the hall. It's more than 2,000 miles from Feiyun village. The great deacon may have been delayed by something on the way. Someone said cautiously, "Humph. Even if something happened, with the great deacon's meticulous mind, he would certainly send a subordinate back to deliver the news. But now there is no news. Do you think it's normal?" Wu Deong frowned and said coldly, "Shopkeeper, do you think that the great deacon has met with some mishap?" Someone couldn't help asking. Wu Deong was silent, his face as gloomy as water. Obviously, that was what he thought. At this time, a servant hurried into the hall and said, "Manager, there is news from the gate guards that a young man riding Lien Rufeng's scaly horse has entered the Green Sun tribe in the evening." Hearing this, Wu Deong's eyes lit up. He remembered Lien Rufeng, the leader of the guards from Feiyun village. "Where is the young man now?" Wu Deong asked. According to the spy, the young man has been living in the Old Crow Inn. The servant answered quickly. "Something is wrong. If the young man was sent back by the great deacon to deliver the news, he should have come to our Wu business immediately. But now he has gone to the Old Crow Inn. Obviously something is wrong." A man in the hall frowned and said. Wu Deong's eyes flashed. After a moment of thinking, he waved his hand and said, "Send some people to the Old Crow Inn. By any means, bring the young man back to me." The servant immediately took the order and left. Wu Deong thought for a moment, and then he changed the topic and said to everyone present, "Everyone, the 3,000 mountains have been rather restless lately. Many top great figures from the empire have gathered here for the sake of a peerless treasure. During this period of time, all of you must be careful and not give any clues. Otherwise, even I won't be able to save all of you if something happens." Everyone nodded solemnly. Of course, they were also aware of this matter. In recent days, many strange faces had come to the Green Sun tribe, including some extremely powerful nobles. Under such circumstances, the local bullies like them had to keep a low profile. Well, you can go now. When the young man is brought back and everything is clear, I will tell you. Wu Deong waved his hand. Things had been made clear, so there was no need to mobilize the people. Most importantly, in Wu Deong's view, a teenager from Feiyun village could be easily brought back by a few people without any accident. In the room on the second floor of the Old Crow Inn, as soon as Lin Sun walked in, he looked around the room and found nothing wrong. Then he threw the animal skin bag in his hand into the storage ring. When he was outside, he had to expose the animal skin bag in order to cover up his spiritual storage device. But now that there was no one around, there was no need to do so. All he had to do was wait until he left the inn to take out the beast skin pouch. I rode Lien Rufeng's scaly horse into the Green Sun tribe. I don't know whether Wu Business found out or not. But no matter what, this problem has to be solved sooner or later. Lin Sun crossed his legs and lay lazily on the bed, lost in thought. He knew that because of Wu Henshui's death, Wu Business would never let it go. Instead of passively letting them find trouble in Feiyun village, it was better to settle the matter in the Green Sun tribe. This was also the reason why Lin Sun swaggered into the Green Sun tribe on Lien Rufeng's scaly horse. He wanted to attract Wu Business's attention. Although it was dangerous, Lin Sun already had a plan in mind, so he was not nervous. Chapter 56. When the 4 or 5 people entered the Old Crow Inn, the one-eyed bruiser sitting behind the counter narrowed his eyes and looked at the leading young man, with an imperceptible resentment flashing across his face. The leading young man was thin and vigorous, with long and narrow eyes. Dressed in a leather robe, he exuded an unruly aura. "Wu Jie, what are you doing here?" the one-eyed bruiser asked in a low voice. At this moment, the noisy atmosphere in the hall was gone. The diners and drunkards all looked unnatural, as if they were quite afraid of the young man named Wu Jie. In the Green Sun tribe, the nickname Mad Dog Wu Jie was quite well known. Backed by the Wu Business, he was cruel and bloodthirsty. Over the years, at least hundreds of people had died in his hands and he had offended countless people. But because of the Wu Business, he was still free and unfettered. For example, the other eye of the one-eyed bruiser, the owner of the Old Crow Inn, was gouged out by Wu Jie with his fingers 2 years ago. Wu Jie grinned and said, "Old one-eyed, you'd better sit down. I'm here to take someone away." Then he turned to ask a man beside him, "Which room is the boy in?" "The southwest corner of the 2nd floor." "Let's go." With his hands behind his back, Wu Jie leisurely walked to the 2nd floor. Watching them swagger past him, the one-eyed bruiser's face was also changing, but in the end, he held back and said nothing. Immediately, the one-eyed bruiser seemed to realize something. He suddenly looked up and the image of a handsome and warm young man quietly emerged in his mind. It seems that the young man is really not simple. But this time he has offended Mad Dog Wu Jie. I'm afraid he's doomed. The one-eyed bruiser drank a glass of wine and sighed in his heart. Mad Dog Wu Jie, with the cultivation of the 4th level of martial realm, was not the top in the Green Sun tribe, but he had the backing of Wu Business. What's more, those he killed were all ordinary people, so he did not offend those powerful figures. So far, no one could do anything to him. The diners in the hall on the 1st floor also realized that Mad Dog Wu Jie seemed to want to deal with the young man with an unfamiliar face, and they couldn't help but start discussing. "In my opinion, it's the first time that strange young man has entered the Green Sun tribe. Look at the huge bag in his hand, it's obvious that it's rich. It's a pity that he's targeted by this notorious Mad Dog. There's no chance for him to survive." "Pity? Are you drooling? Earlier, I saw that you've been thinking about that little fat sheep and were looking for an opportunity to make a move." "Humph! Don't talk about me, look at the others in this hall. Which one of them isn't thinking about this little fat sheep?" The crowd had different expressions on their faces. Some of them were more or less regretful, not because they sympathized with Lin Sun, but because Lin Sun, the little fat sheep, was about to be eaten by a mad dog. Amidst the discussion, the door on the southwest corner of the second floor was opened. Wu Jie and the others walked in and closed the door again, making it impossible to see what was happening inside. Fatty Xiao, why are you back? The one-eyed bruiser glanced at Fatty Xiao, who had left before, and saw that he had returned with 4 people. When he saw the appearance of the 4 people behind Fatty Xiao, the one-eyed bruiser couldn't help but feel strange. These 4 people were all ruthless characters in the Green Sun tribe. But compared with Mad Dog Wu Jie, these 4 people were still far behind. Fatty Xiao smirked and said in a low voice, "I've been thinking about it for a long time. I'm not willing to watch a fat sheep without being able to take a bite. So, I invited some friends to join me." The one-eyed bruiser sneered, "You're too late. The little fat sheep has already been taken." Fatty Xiao's face changed. "Who the hell is so wicked?" The one-eyed bruiser was about to say something when he heard a loud bang. The door on the southwest corner of the second floor opened, and a black shadow was thrown out and smashed on a table on the first floor. Wine glasses, plates, jugs, and the table were all broken. Several drunkards who were drinking at the table were so shocked that they staggered back and almost fell to the ground. Many screams rang out, and the scene suddenly became chaotic. The figure that was thrown down was one of Mad Dog Wu Jie's subordinates, but at this moment, his neck had been twisted and he had turned into a corpse lying on the ground. His eyes were still wide open, and there was still a trace of fear written on them. Seeing this scene, all the people present fell silent. It was Wu Jie's man. Fatty Xiao's expression suddenly changed. He finally knew who had attacked the little sheep before him. However, he never expected that the dead body that was thrown down the building was not the little sheep. The one-eyed bruiser's face also changed, and he couldn't help looking at the room in the southwest corner of the second floor. Bang! Almost at the same time, another dead body was thrown down the stairs. It was also Wu Jie's man, which caused another uproar in the room. Everyone's face changed. The way this dead body died was even more frightening. Its arms were twisted like fried dough twists, and its chest had collapsed as if it had been trampled by a bull. Its face was extremely miserable. Fatty Xiao's cheeks twitched fiercely and he gasped. He finally realized that the one-eyed bruiser's previous warning was right. The boy was not a little fat sheep, but a fierce wolf in sheep's clothing. "Wu Jie is also up there?" Fatty Xiao couldn't help but ask. The one-eyed bruiser nodded. He was also quite shocked. It was unusual that 2 of his men had been killed by Wu Jie in a row. Bang! Bang! Soon, another body was thrown down. This time, there were 2 bodies. One had its head split open, and blood and brain matter gushed out. The other had its throat cut open, and blood flowed out and soon gathered into a pool of blood on the ground. At this time, the diners and drunkards were all frightened by the tragic and bloody scene in front of them. Some of the greed in their hearts disappeared without a trace. It was too horrifying. From beginning to end, there was no sound of fighting. The 4 men brought by Mad Dog Wu Jie were turned into dead bodies and thrown down one after another. This was not something an ordinary person could do. However, even though they were shocked, no one left. They all looked up at the room in the southwest corner of the second floor, as if waiting for something. The one-eyed bruiser was no exception. Now there were only Mad Dog Wu Jie and the strange boy left in the room. Who would be the loser of this battle? As for Fatty Xiao and the others, they had long been scared out of their wit. They rejoiced in their hearts that Mad Dog Wu Jie had taken action in advance. If it had been them, they would have become corpses on the ground now. No more dead bodies were thrown out. Just when everyone was waiting anxiously, they saw the figure of a boy coming out of the room. He wore coarse gray linen clothes, and his long hair was casually tied behind his head, revealing a handsome and warm face. His black eyes were clear, his nose was straight, and there was a trace of youthfulness between his brows. There was still a trace of a smile hanging on the corners of his mouth. Coupled with his thin figure, he seemed harmless. He carried a huge animal skin bag on his back and a bloody package in his hand. Drops of dark red blood oozed from the surface and dripped on the ground, which looked extremely horrifying. Needless to say, this boy was Lin Sun, and there must be a head in the package in his hand. Seeing such a scene, the atmosphere became even more deathly silent. Only the sound of Lin Sun's unhurried footsteps could be heard. The one-eyed bruiser's hand trembled, and the wine in his hand spilled. He didn't know it, because his heart had been overwhelmed by deep shock. Although he had long seen that Lin Sun was not an ordinary person, he still did not expect that Mad Dog Wu Jie would also die in Lin Sun's hands. Fatty Xiao and the others, as well as the diners present, were also stunned, with undisguised fear in their eyes. There were many fierce characters in the Green Sun tribe. If they were not strong, there was no way they could survive in this unruly place. Because of this, when they saw Lin Sun kill Mad Dog Wu Jie and his men in such a short time, everyone present realized that there was another fierce man in the Green Sun tribe today, and he was not just any ordinary fierce. "Boss, that room has to be checked out." Lin Sun came to the counter and said with a helpless smile. The one-eyed bruiser trembled all over. He immediately took out 20 copper coins and handed them over. "This is the room fee." Lin Sun took 15 copper coins and left the remaining 5 to the one-eyed bruiser. "There was some accident today, and a lot of things in the inn were destroyed. Take the money from the corpses as compensation." Immediately, Lin Sun glanced thoughtfully at Fatty Xiao next to him and reminded him with a smile, "Dude, you wet your pants." Fatty Xiao was stunned and looked down. There was a water stain under his feet, and between his legs was also wet. He couldn't help but feel hot and uncomfortable, wishing he could find a hole to hide in. Lin Sun had already left, and the deathly silence in the hall soon dissipated. At this time, everyone looked at Fatty Xiao's embarrassing situation and couldn't help laughing. Fatty Xiao was scared to wet his pants. The one-eyed bruiser saw all this, but he didn't smile. He knew very well that Mad Dog Wu Jie and his men died here today. It wouldn't be long before the wrath of Wu business was aroused, and the consequences would be very serious. I can only hope that the young man can get out of danger. The one-eyed bruiser sighed in his heart. Lin Sun's killing of Wu Jie was equivalent to indirectly avenging him for gouging out his eyes. Naturally, he didn't want Lin Sun to be harmed by Wu business. But unfortunately, the one-eyed bruiser knew that, according to the influence of Wu business in Green Sun tribe, the young man might not survive tonight. I didn't expect that they would be so impatient to take action in advance tonight. It seems that I have to change my plan and go to Keystone business at night. Lin Sun led the scaly horse and walked on the street at night, calculating in his heart. Killing Mad Dog Wu Jie meant that all the hatred was concentrated on him, but this was exactly what Lin Sun wanted to see. Since Wu Henshui disregarded the lives of the villagers of Feiyun Village and wanted to encroach on everything in Feiyun Village, it was destined that this matter would not end well. Lin Sun would not let Wu business vent all their anger on the villagers of Feiyun Village because of Wu Henshui's death. But what Lin Sun didn't expect was that they acted so fast, so Lin Sun had to change his plan temporarily. He knew that the moment he left the Old Crow Inn, the news of Mad Dog Wu Jie's death would inevitably spread to Wu business at the fastest speed. So, he must solve this matter tonight, or he would be in danger. Chapter 57. The Green Sun tribe was brightly lit at night. Although it was not as prosperous as the daytime, there were still many pedestrians coming and going on the streets. Keystone business was located in the central area of the Green Sun tribe, covering an area of more than 10 acres. The 3-story building made of bluestone was magnificent and eye-catching, which stood out among the nearby buildings. When Lin Sun arrived, he found that Keystone business was not closed. Instead, it was quite lively. Many animal carriages were parked nearby, and many practitioners could be seen going in and out. Lin soon tied the scaly horse to one side and walked directly into Keystone Business with the huge animal skin bag. Keystone Business was quite magnificent and spacious, with a row of long white stone counters. On both sides were different areas, where spiritual herbs, spiritual materials, weapons, equipment, and other necessities for cultivation were listed. Many attendants shuttled back and forth among the guests, their attitudes refined and courteous, neither servile nor overbearing. There were also some guards scattered around, with sharp eyes and long breaths. They all had the cultivation between the 4th level of martial realm and the 6th level of martial realm, especially the old man sitting behind the counter in the lobby, whose whole body was faintly overflowing with evil chi. He was actually in Gang spirit realm. All of this showed that Keystone Business was extremely powerful and rich in resources. Lin soon watched all this silently and was amazed in his heart. He didn't know that Keystone Business was a top chamber of commerce even in Xiao Empire, nor did he know that the boss behind Keystone Business was a legendary figure known as Fortune Godshire. But from many details, he could see that Keystone Business was indeed incomparable to ordinary chambers of commerce. A waiter came up to him and took him to the exchange area on one side after asking him some questions. This area was relatively quiet, with only a dozen or so figures scattered around. "May I ask what items you want to sell?" A middle-aged man in brocade robe came forward and asked with a smile. He didn't look down on or perfunctory Lin Sun because of his young age, but he wasn't too enthusiastic either. His attitude was neither cold nor hot, and he was well-mannered. "I'd like to meet your shopkeeper," Lin Sun said with a smile. The middle-aged man frowned and said, "Sorry, the shopkeeper has something important to do. I'm afraid he can't come out to meet you at this time." A 13 or 14-year-old boy in coarse linen wanted to see the shopkeeper directly. It was a little arrogant. Did he think that as the shopkeeper of Keystone Business, he could see the shopkeeper at will? "Oh, it's okay, I can wait," Lin Sun said casually, as if he didn't notice the change of the middle-aged man's attitude. The middle-aged man's brows knit together even more tightly, and his attitude became slightly cold and indifferent as he said, "Young master, may I know what rare treasure you possess that you must personally come here with the shopkeeper?" Lin Sun laughed. "Do you think I don't deserve to meet your shopkeeper?" The middle-aged man in embroidered robes said indifferently, "How could I dare? It's just that I know that the items in young master's hands aren't that precious. If you want to sell them, there's absolutely no need for shopkeeper to come here personally." As he said, he pointed at the huge animal skin bag carried by Lin Sun with a little pride and said, "If I'm not mistaken, there should be 31 pieces of beast fur, some bones, sharp claws and other items in it. In addition, there are dozens of spiritual materials, right?" Lin Sun was surprised and said, "Good eyesight." The middle-aged man in embroidered robes said indifferently, "Young master, in our business, our eyesight and sense of smell are incomparable to ordinary people. Perhaps these items are of high value in your eyes, but in our Keystone Business, these items can only be exchanged for 4,000 copper coins, which can buy an ordinary spiritual weapon at most." After a pause, he continued, "So, young master, have you changed your mind now?" Lin Sun shook his head. "I think it's better for you to inform your shopkeeper. It's not that I don't trust you, but I have something else to discuss with your shopkeeper." The middle-aged man in embroidered robes saw that the boy in front of him was still ignorant after he explained patiently to this extent. He was immediately displeased and snorted coldly, "Young master, goodbye." This was tantamount to driving Lin Sun away. Lin Sun was stunned and said helplessly, "Uncle, I don't know why you are angry, but if you really do this, it will be too ungracious." The middle-aged man in embroidered robes was so angry that he laughed. "You are just a young boy. How dare you say that I am ungracious?" There was a touch of sternness in his voice. Lin Sun said with a smile, "I just think that you can inform your shopkeeper first. If I really come to make trouble, you can drive me out, can't you?" The middle-aged man in embroidered robes was already impatient. He didn't listen to Lin Sun's explanation at all. He waved his hand and said, "Come on, ask this young master to leave." Immediately, 2 practitioners who were guarding nearby came over. Seeing this, Lin Sun couldn't help but feel helpless. He had spoken sincerely enough, but he didn't expect that the middle-aged man didn't even bother to pay attention to his request. Lin Sun sighed, "Uncle, I think you will definitely regret it later." The middle-aged man's face darkened and he shouted, "Why don't you kick this arrogant boy out?" The 2 practitioners exchanged a look and suddenly stretched out their arms to grab Lin Sun from left and right. Bang! However, although they moved fast, Lin Sun moved faster. He suddenly stepped forward, bent his elbow and swung his arm. He suddenly clasped the neck of the middle-aged man in embroidered robes, and then shouted, "Whoever dares to move, I will break his neck immediately." The 2 practitioners suddenly hesitated. Being subdued by one blow, the middle-aged man in embroidered robes was not afraid at all. Instead, he roared angrily, "Someone comes to make trouble in our keystone business." There was a commotion in the nearby area. Before long, many guards rushed over and surrounded Lin Sun. However, because the middle-aged man in embroidered robes was subdued, no one dared to come forward without authorization. "Young man, I advise you to stop. Don't make a mistake." An old man separated the crowd and paced towards them. It was the practitioner of Gang Spirit Realm in the lobby. Lin Sun looked at ease and even laughed. "Do you believe me if I say this is a misunderstanding?" The old man was obviously stunned. "Oh, what misunderstanding? Tell me." The middle-aged man in embroidered robes shouted first, "This little bastard just sells some cheap goods, and he wants the shopkeeper to meet him in person. Isn't it obvious that he is here to make trouble?" The old man glanced at the huge animal skin bag beside Lin Sun and said coldly, "Young man, is this the misunderstanding you said?" Lin Sun said seriously, "I just want to meet your shopkeeper. Is that called making trouble?" The old man was stunned and said in a low voice, "Anyway, let him go first." Lin Sun shook his head, "I can't agree unless your shopkeeper comes." A killing intent flashed in the old man's eyes. "It seems that you are going to refuse a toast only to drink a forfeit?" Lin Sun said with a smile, "Sorry, old man. I'm not scared." At the same time, he pinched the middle-aged man in embroidered robes so hard that he almost suffocated and his face turned red. The threat was self-evident. "Don't worry about me. Kill this bastard first." The middle-aged man in embroidered robes shouted in a hurry. At this moment, a majestic voice sounded, "What are you shouting and shouting?" The shopkeeper came. Suddenly, everyone present showed a touch of awe, even the old man kept silent. "It seems that if I don't make such a big noise, I really can't see the shopkeeper." Lin Sun muttered to himself and looked in the direction of the voice. A middle-aged man in a navy blue robe walked over. He had 3 strands of willow whiskers under his chin and an elegant face. His every movement was dignified. This man was Yanjun, the shopkeeper of Keystone Business. "Young man, let him go first." As soon as Yanjun appeared, he said calmly, "I can give you a chance to explain." "Okay." Lin Sun let go of the middle-aged man in embroidered robes without worrying whether he would be killed on the spot after doing so. Yanjun was a little surprised. He waved his hand to signal the crowd to leave and said, "I hope your explanation won't let me down." Lin Sun smiled and didn't explain anything. Instead, he took out a token and threw it to Yanjun. "Look at this first." Yanjun frowned, but when he took the token and looked at it, his eyes narrowed and his expression changed slightly imperceptibly. He blurted out, "Where did you get this token?" Seeing this, all the people nearby were stunned. "Did this token have any origin?" Lin Sun answered concisely, "Someone gave it to me." Yanjun pondered for a long time and suddenly took a deep breath. A touch of fierceness flashed through his eyes. "Someone gave it to you? Do you think I will believe it? This token is not something a young man like you can have." Tell me the truth, or don't blame me for being rude. The token was real. Yen Zhen could be sure that the unique mark on it was absolutely not fake. But in his opinion, it was impossible for a teenager to have this token. Obviously, Yen Zhen had regarded Lin Sun as a thief who came to Keystone business with a token to swindle people. Lin Sun couldn't help feeling annoyed. The middle-aged man in brocade said that he was not qualified to meet the shopkeeper and deliberately came to pick a fight with him. When he met the shopkeeper, the middle-aged man obviously questioned Lin Sun as a liar. How could Lin Sun keep calm? But he still wore a smile on his face and sighed. It seems that Shi Xuan lied. It's useless to have his token. Shi Xuan. This was the name of the eldest child. Yen Zhen's face changed slightly again. He couldn't help but hesitate. Young man, did the eldest child send you here? The others present were also shocked. How could this shabbily dressed young man know the eldest child Shi Xuan? It was impossible. This guy must be fooling them. How could the eldest child make friends with a poor young man? At this time, when he heard Yen Zhen said that he was sent by Shi Xuan, Lin Sun couldn't help but be speechless. Was he the kind of person who could only listen to others in their eyes? Although it was not snobbish, it was obvious that they never really took Lin Sun seriously. But Lin Sun also understood that many people in the world were like this, so he was not angry about it. Chapter 58. Mu Wansu returned to the Green Sun tribe alone 2 days ago in order to find out more about Shai Yutong, the young Sword King. The Green Sun tribe was undoubtedly the best choice to inquire about Shai Yutong. In Mu Wansu's view, since Shai Yutong had come to the 3,000 mountains, he was bound to choose the Green Sun tribe as his temporary residence. As long as she found out if anyone had seen Shai Yutong recently, she could probably figure out when he arrived at the 3,000 mountains. It was Shi Xuan's idea to do so. Mu Wansu didn't understand why the young master was so anxious to meet Shai Yutong. Was it just to see the uniqueness of the Invincible Sword Sutra? Or did the young master think that Shai Yutong had found the peerless treasure? But whether she understood or not, Mu Wansu had to act. It had been 2 days since she returned to the Green Sun tribe, but so far she had not found any news about Shai Yutong. Mu Wansu couldn't help but feel helpless. Shai Yutong was so mysterious that it wasn't easy to find out anything about him. Fortunately, tonight, Mu Wansu received news that a golden flame beast, which had not appeared in the world for hundreds of years, had appeared by a river thousands of miles away from the Green Sun tribe. It was highly likely that it had something to do with the peerless treasure. And it was said that Lu Yukuan, the eldest son of Lu Wujuan, the governor of the southwestern province of the empire, was killed by this beast. This was shocking news, and it was sufficient to cause a great uproar. Mu Wansu had made up her mind to investigate the whereabouts of this golden flame beast tomorrow morning. However, to Mu Wansu's surprise, on this night, when she was going to discuss something with Yen Zhen, the shopkeeper of Keystone business, she saw the shameless and cunning boy again. At this moment, Mu Wansu stood in the distance, watching Lin being questioned by Yen Zhen and surrounded by people like a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. She didn't know why, but she suddenly felt a touch of joy in her heart. "Little bastard, you deserve this?" Mu Wansu couldn't wait for Yen Zhen to teach this shameless boy a good lesson and vent her anger. But as soon as this idea came to her mind, she found that the little bastard in the distance was looking at her. Mu Wansu's heart thumped. Just as she was about to dodge, it was already too late. The little bastard waved his hand in surprise and shouted, "Sister Wansu, what a coincidence! Prove to them what's the matter with this token. Brother Shi Xuan never said that I would be treated coldly if I entered Keystone business with this token." Mu Wansu was completely speechless. She held her forehead with her hand. How could this guy be so shameless? He called her so intimately. If she didn't know better, she would really think that it had something to do with her. Mu Wansu wanted to turn around and leave as if she didn't know him. However, she remembered that the token was indeed given to her by the eldest young master Shurshuan. If the eldest young master found out about this, it wouldn't be right. What to do? Mu Wansu hesitated. If it was possible, she really wanted to grab that little bastard's ear and fiercely ravage it. It was simply too infuriating. Even when asking for help, he acted so righteously. Seeing this scene, Yen Zhen and others couldn't help but feel puzzled. They all looked into the distance and immediately saw Mu Wansu in the distance. Mu Wansu was still in a black dress. Her hair was tied up in a bun. Her face was beautiful and delicate, and her figure was graceful. Her eyebrows were straight, but there was a sharp spirit like a knife between them. She was like a wild rose in full bloom on the cliff, delicate and beautiful, but with thorns. Seeing her, Yen Zhen's pupils suddenly shrank. He said in a daze, "Miss Wansu, do you know this young man?" Others were also puzzled. Mu Wansu sighed in her heart. She could only walk over and lightly opened her red lips, saying, "This token was indeed given by the eldest young master." She didn't answer directly, but the meaning of her words was clear. In an instant, Yen Zhen's doubts were swept away. Mu Wansu was the person in charge of keystone business in Donglin town. Even Yen Zhen's status was far lower than hers. Most importantly, Yen Zhen was very clear that Mu Wansu had been helping the eldest young master these days. How could her words be false? It seemed that he had wronged this young man. Yen Zhen thought in his heart. When he looked at Lin Sun again, his eyes had changed. He didn't know why the eldest young master would give such a precious token to this young man. But since the eldest young master did so, there must be a reason. The expressions of the middle-aged man and others changed continuously. Was this young man a friend of the eldest young master? If the eldest young master knew what happened today, they dared not to think about it. Especially the middle-aged man, he couldn't help regretting his rude behavior just now. But how could he know at that time that this shabbily dressed young man had such a powerful background? At this time, the middle-aged man suddenly saw Lin Sun turn around and look at him. His heart thumped, thinking that Lin Sun was going to get even with him. Unexpectedly, Lin Sun cupped his hands apologetically and said, "I was impulsive just now. It's my fault. Please forgive me, uncle." The middle-aged man was stunned and said subconsciously, "It's okay. It's just a misunderstanding. Please don't take it to heart, child." Lin Sun smiled and said no more. Seeing this, Yen Zhen waved his hand and said, "You can all leave." As he said, he led Lin Sun and Mu Wansu along a long corridor into an elegant room and sat down separately. "May I know your name, child?" Yen Zhen's attitude had become upright and enthusiastic. He was quite elegant, so he talked with a smile, which made people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. "Senior, you are too polite. My name is Lin Sun." Lin Sun smiled and cupped his hands. Mu Wansu sat alone on one side, absent-mindedly playing with a delicate teacup. It seemed that she didn't want to be involved in this conversation at all. Her attitude made Yen Zhen feel a little strange, but he still said with a smile, "Child Lin, it's my fault today. Please don't take it to heart." Yen Zhen was polite, but Lin Sun was even more polite. He quickly stood up and cupped his hands, looking ashamed and apologetic. "Senior, you are too polite. It's my fault. How can you blame others?" Yen Zhen couldn't figure out Lin Sun's mind. Lin Sun was so arrogant in the hall just now. Why did he become so humble now? With that in mind, Yen Zhen opened his mouth and said, "If I may be so bold as to ask, young lord, if you had taken out your medallion earlier, perhaps this misunderstanding wouldn't have happened." Before Yen Zhen finished, Lin Sun said embarrassedly, "Senior, the situation was urgent at that time. Besides, I really couldn't figure out the use of the token, so I made such a bad plan. I thought that as long as the matter got out of hand, I could definitely alert you to come here." Yen Zhen was speechless. This brat was quite honest, to be able to speak his mind so frankly. His character could be considered not bad. Unconsciously, Yen Zhen had a good impression of Lin Sun. It was rare for a 13 or 14-year-old boy to have such a mind. The key was that Lin Sun was flexible and knew when to advance or retreat. If Yen Zhen didn't see it with his own eyes, he would doubt that Lin Sun was a sophisticated adult. Did you really think so at that time? Suddenly, Mu Wansu opened her mouth and stared at Lin Sun with her beautiful eyes like knives. She could tell with a single glance that this little brat had been talking nonsense since the moment he entered the room. He seemed to be very humble, but in reality, the words he said made it impossible for anyone to find fault with him. He was extremely cunning. In particular, Mu Wansu knew that Lin Sun wouldn't make such a big noise in public just to lure Yen Zhen out. Maybe he had other intentions. At this time, Lin Sun smiled bitterly and sighed, "Sister Wansu, it's the first time for me to go out of the mountain village in my life. I have no experience and insight. If I do something wrong, please don't hesitate to give me some advice." As he spoke, he bowed to Mu Wansu in a sincere and earnest manner, which made Mu Wansu unable to accuse him of anything, even though she knew he was acting. Otherwise, she would seem to be too stingy. This bastard is getting more and more cunning. Mu Wansu was annoyed in her heart, but she put on a sweet smile and said in a clear voice, "Well, it's over. Don't mention it again. Besides, you are favored by the young master. Even if you make a mistake, everyone can forgive you. Haha, Miss Wansu is right. Don't mention it again." Yen Zhen laughed. "By the way, what is your purpose in coming to Keystone business this time?" Lin Sun's face suddenly became solemn. He cupped his hands and said, "To tell you the truth, I have 2 things to do this time." "Go ahead." Yen Zhen stroked his beard and smiled. "First, I'm here to sell some goods in exchange for some daily necessities for the villagers of Feiyun Village. At the same time, I hope to reach a trade contract with Keystone business." Lin Sun said quickly, "Senior, you may not know that Feiyun Village is now rich in Feiyun fire copper. I think Keystone business needs these spiritual materials, so I plan to sign a trade contract with Keystone business for the purchase and sale of Feiyun fire copper, which will pave a long-term way for Feiyun Village to make money." Yen Zhen raised his eyebrows. "Feiyun fire copper?" Lin Sun said with a smile, "Yes, that's it. Sister Wansu saw it last time when she was a guest in Feiyun Village with the young master." Mu Wansu was also involved in Lin Sun's words. She glared at Lin Sun and finally nodded, "He's right." Yen Zhen was immediately relieved and said with a smile, "Well, I can make the decision on this matter. It's a win-win situation." Lin Sun smiled, "Thank you, Senior." Once this matter was settled, under the protection of Keystone business, anyone who dared to touch the Feiyun fire copper would have to go through Keystone business first. At the same time, because of his relationship with Shishuan, Keystone business wouldn't dare to cheat the villagers of Feiyun Village. In this way, even if Lin left Feiyun Village in the future, he wouldn't have to worry about this matter. Moreover, selling Feiyun fire copper could bring lasting profits to Feiyun Village, which was enough to gradually improve the villagers' lives and make a living. This was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Lin Sun had been planning this matter as early as when he came to Green Sun Tribe. Seeing that it was settled so smoothly, he felt relieved. "Child, what's the second matter?" Yen Zhen asked. Lin Sun glanced at Mu Wansu and then at Yen Zhen. Suddenly, a bitter smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Mu Wansu's heart skipped a beat even though he didn't say anything. She thought to herself, "This little bastard is full of evil tricks. He must take this opportunity to raise some thorny issues." Chapter 59. Mu Wansu said almost subconsciously, "Don't tell me." Yen Zhen was also stunned. What was going on? In his impression, Mu Wansu rarely lost control like this. On the contrary, she was beautiful, wise and resourceful. She was also a famous and powerful figure in Donglin Town. The nickname Black Rose was not for nothing. However, ever since she met Lin Sun, she suddenly found that all the schemes and means she had in the past were useless. Moreover, every time she saw Lin Sun, she felt as if she was unlucky. She was used again and again. She could only endure the bitterness, unable to express it. This feeling really made Mu Wansu feel aggrieved. At this moment, when she saw Lin Sun's bitter face, she couldn't help but vent her anger. Lin Sun sighed as if he didn't notice it. Sister Wansu, we have to let Senior Yanzhen know about this. Otherwise, I'm afraid there will be some misunderstanding. Mu Wansu was stunned. What did he mean? Did he think she already knew what he was going to say? But soon, Mu Wansu understood the purpose of Lin Sun's words. Yanzhen said seriously, since Miss Wansu also knows about this, please tell us directly. Don't worry about any misunderstanding. Even if it's a big trouble, we have to discuss it and come up with a solution. Mu Wansu was completely speechless. Yanzhen was too cooperative. Lin Sun looked solemn. He took a deep breath and was about to say something. Just then, there was a knock on the door. Lin Sun couldn't help frowning, but Mu Wansu immediately smiled. This was God's help. Yanzhen stood up and said, "Someone still rashly knocks at this time. Something urgent must have happened." Saying this, he opened the door. A waiter stood outside with a trace of surprise on his face. "What happened?" Yanzhen asked directly. Manager Wu Deong, the manager of Wu Business, came with a large group of people. "They want us to hand over a person," the waiter said quickly. Yanzhen was stunned and his face darkened. "Hand over who? Is Wu Deong here to make trouble?" Lin Sun stood up and said helplessly, "Senior, they should be here to deal with me." The smile on Mu Wansu's lips suddenly froze. How could she not understand that the second thing Lin Sun was about to say was related to Wu Business? He was tricked by this bastard again. Mu Wansu gnashed her teeth in hatred. Yanzhen exclaimed, "Catch you? Why is that?" Lin Sun quickly told the story about Wu Henshui, insisting that Wu Henshui was killed by the villagers in order to occupy all the spiritual fields and Feiyun Fire copper mine in Feiyun village. At the same time, he also said that as soon as he entered the Green Sun tribe, he was hunted by Wu Business. In desperation, he had to come to Keystone Business for help. Yanzhen frowned. "I see." He also felt that things were a little tricky. The owner of Wu Business was a big shot in Donglin Town. Even Keystone Business was reluctant to offend such a local bully easily. But when he thought of the relationship between Lin Sun and Shishuan, Yanzhen knew that he had to help Lin Sun, but he was bound to pay a high price. For a moment, Yanzhen couldn't help hesitating and looked at Mu Wansu. Mu Wansu also felt a headache coming on. This little bastard was really good at making trouble. He had just entered the Green Sun tribe and had already made such a big noise. If the eldest young master knew about this, would he regret giving away the token? In Mu Wansu's opinion, she couldn't wait to send Lin Sun to Wu Business so that she could vent her anger. But the reality didn't allow her to do so. Mu Wansu sighed in her heart. Well, she would help him again this time. If he went too far in the future, even if she had to bear the blame of the eldest child, she would draw a clear line with this little bastard. Mu Wansu's eyebrows showed a touch of sharpness and decisiveness. Yanzhen, go tell them that Lin Sun is a member of Keystone Business, and tell them to behave themselves. Yanzhen understood tacitly and left in a hurry. Seeing this, Lin Sun couldn't help saying, "Sister Wansu, I don't care about my safety. What I care about is the safety of the villagers in Feiyun village. If they want to vent their anger on Feiyun village, I'd rather not help." At the end of his words, his expression became resolute. Mu Wansu gazed at him for a long time and couldn't help nodding. "Although you don't leave a good impression on me, I can promise you that I won't let this matter affect Feiyun village." Lin Sun solemnly cupped his hands. "Thank you very much. I will remember your kindness and pay you back 10 times in the future." Seeing Lin Sun's serious look, Mu Wansu felt slightly uncomfortable. She waved her hand and said, "I don't ask you to pay me back, but please don't make trouble for me in the future. Lin Sun nodded and said nothing. As the saying goes, it's a taboo to talk too deep with a shallow acquaintance. He knew what he did today was a bit too much, but he could only do it now. Whether it was for the sake of the villagers in Feiyun village or to find a temporary shelter for himself. Not long after, Yanjin returned and said with a smile, "The matter has been solved." With Wu Diong's courage, even the big shot in Donglin town behind him can only endure when facing our keystone business. Lin Sun got up again, thanked Yanjin again, and left soon after. "Miss Wansu, what's the relationship between the lad and the eldest child?" Yanjin couldn't help asking as soon as Lin Sun left. Mu Wansu answered absent-mindedly, "The eldest child said that the lad has a promising future. Apart from that, he didn't say anything else. Even I can't figure it out." Yanjin was stunned. He had thought that Lin Sun and the eldest child were close friends. Who would have thought that it was such a strange relationship? Mu Wansu took a deep breath and said, "Forget it. Let's not talk about him. The eldest child may return to Green Sun Tribe in 2 days. You have to be prepared." Saying this, she got up and left. But inexplicably, she thought of Lin Sun. She didn't know whether the lad understood her meaning or not. She hoped that he would not use the token of the eldest child to intimidate others in the future. Otherwise, she would not spare him. When Lin Sun walked out of Keystone business, it was already late at night. There were few people on the street. Scattered dim yellow lights sprinkled on the road. It was cold and quiet. Lin Sun led the scaly horse forward. He didn't encounter any ambush along the way. Judging from this, Wu Business did retreat after receiving the warning from Keystone Business. It seemed that the outcome of this confrontation of forces had been decided silently. But for the first time, Lin Sun knew the real meaning of the so-called forces. Old Crow Inn. When Lin Sun returned, the owner, the one-eyed bruiser, was sleeping behind the counter. But when he saw Lin Sun, he woke up with a shudder. There was shock, fear, and awe on his face. "Sorry to bother you again. Can you get a room for me?" Lin Sun smiled and handed over 20 copper coins. No. Only 5 copper coins are enough," the one-eyed bruiser said quickly. What happened tonight caused a sensation in the Green Sun tribe. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen to the young man. But the final result surprised everyone. Wu Business admitted defeat. It was also at that time that the one-eyed bruiser realized that the young man had a close relationship with Keystone Business. No wonder he dared to kill Mad Dog Wu Jie without hesitation. He must have something to rely on. Lin Sun didn't stand on ceremony. He took back the 15 copper coins and walked into a room under the guidance of a waiter, who nodded and bowed. The moment the door was closed, the smile on Lin Sun's lips disappeared. He stood in front of the window, looking at the vast night in the distance. A rare trace of loneliness hung on his handsome and warm face. After a long time, he shook his head, put out the light, and lay on the bed in the dark. That night, Lin Sun didn't practice for the first time. The next morning, when Lin Sun left the Old Crow Inn, the usual warm smile hung on his lips again, and he looked radiant. In the daytime, the Green Sun tribe was very prosperous, bustling with people coming and going. Everywhere was full of hustle and bustle. Lin Sun drank a bowl of soybean milk brewed with green spirit beans and ate 10 steamed buns stuffed with black bull beef from a stall on the street. He touched his belly with satisfaction and went straight to Keystone Business. This time, it was still the middle-aged man in brocade clothes who received him. His name was Shu Liang, an experienced treasure appraiser. Compared with last time, Shu Liang was obviously much more enthusiastic. After helping Lin Sun estimate the goods in the big animal skin bag, he personally helped Lin Sun get 43 silver coins, which was equivalent to 4,300 copper coins. Lin Sun knew that the price Shu Liang gave him was not only fair, but also much more generous. Lin Sun naturally knew why. However, he didn't refuse. When selling the 150 kilograms of Feiyun fire copper hidden in the storage ring, Lin Sun insisted on paying according to the market price. This greatly surprised Xu Liang, and he couldn't help changing his impression of Lin Sun. The original grudge in his heart also disappeared. In the end, 150 kilograms of Feiyun fire copper was exchanged for 550 silver coins, which equaled to 55,000 copper coins. This was a shocking amount of wealth. In the following shopping, Lin Sun deeply understood the purchasing power of this wealth. All the daily necessities he bought for the villagers of Feiyun only amounted to 1,500 copper coins, which equaled to 15 silver coins. And this batch of necessities was enough for the villagers of Feiyun to live for half a year. In addition, Lin Sun ordered a batch of spiritual medicine from Keystone Business, namely Qi Drawing Pill, Internal Strengthening Pill, Viscera Dredging Powder, and Aperture Dredging Liquid. Although each of them was ordinary, they were all necessary for practitioners of martial realm. They were prepared for the children of the village, who were about to embark on the road of cultivation. In addition, Lin Sun also bought some spiritual ink for inscribing spiritual tattoos for himself and some clothes for himself and Xia Ji respectively. The total value of these items was only equivalent to 400 silver coins, which showed how amazing the purchasing power of the imperial currency was. However, it was also extremely difficult to make money. If Lin Sun hadn't sold the 150 kilograms of Feiyun fire copper, he wouldn't have been able to buy so many things at once. Chapter 60. When Lin Sun came out of Keystone Business, he still had 173 silver coins with him, most of which were spent on elixirs and spiritual ink. But there was nothing he could do about it. Items used for cultivation were extremely expensive, and ordinary people couldn't afford them at all. Lin Sun had heard that there were many people in the world who could set foot in cultivation. But because they were too poor and lacked financial support, they had no chance to cultivate all their lives and could only become an ordinary member of the crowd. Fortunately, Lin Sun didn't have to worry about it now. Near noon, Lin Sun decided to set off for Feiyun village. Xu Liang sent 2 guards to help Lin Sun escort the goods. At the same time, the 2 guards were also responsible for purchasing Feiyun fire copper. This time, they followed Lin Sun to explore the way. Every month, they would take the initiative to go to Feiyun village to purchase Feiyun fire copper. In this way, even if Lin Sun left Feiyun village in the future, he wouldn't have to worry about no one escorting and exchanging goods for Feiyun village. Lin Sun knew that this must be the arrangement of Yanjun, which indirectly proved that Keystone Business really kept its word. As long as Keystone Business was still in Green Sun Tribe and Lin Sun was still alive, no one dared to break the contract. Moreover, with Keystone Business as his backer, it could ensure that no one dared to touch the wealth of Feiyun village. Xu Liang personally sent Lin Sun to the outside of Green Sun Tribe, which attracted a lot of attention along the way. But when they recognized that Lin Sun was from Keystone Business, they all withdrew their eyes tacitly. "Child Lin, why don't you go to Donglin Town to take the county test with your current age and cultivation?" As they talked along the way, Xu Liang was surprised to learn that Lin Sun was only 13 years old this year. Lin Sun was stunned. "County test?" Xu Liang explained patiently. "Every other year, the Empire carries out a series of selections to recruit outstanding talents from all over the world. According to Xu Liang, in order to select talents, Xiao Empire set up county test, state test, province test, and nation test according to different regions. It was easy to understand. Xiao Empire had a vast territory. Except for the Forbidden City, the other territories were divided into 34 provinces. Each province had several states and counties, and each state and county had several prefectures and counties. In short, prefectures and counties, states, provinces, and the capital formed the vast territory of Xiao Empire. In a word, prefectures and counties, states, provinces, and the capital formed the vast territory of Xiao Empire. Among them, the county test was the lowest level of assessment. The conditions for the assessment were also very simple. The age of the examinee must not be more than 15 years old, and they must have a cultivation base. As long as they met this condition, they could pass county tests. On the other hand, the requirements of the state examinations were stricter. It required a precise evaluation of the cultivator's aptitude, comprehension, and innate talent. Only the most outstanding cultivators could pass the examination. The assessment of the province test could not be described as strict, but harsh. Even Shuoyang could not explain the specific assessment content, but he knew that those who could pass the province test were all first-class figures in the world. It was the top test in the Forbidden City state test, which was the top in. It was the top in the Sun City in the capital. The test was not. It was not to mention that county test, state test, Chen's test. If you wanted to take part in nation test, you should be under the age of 18, and pass the approval of county test, state test, and province test. Hearing this, Lin Sun couldn't help marveling in his heart. No one knew how many amazing talents would emerge in the annual assessment, and if these talents could stand out in the assessment, they would definitely become the mainstay of Xiao Empire and shine brightly in the future as long as there were no accidents. But soon, Lin Sun realized a problem and asked, "Uncle Shu Liang, what are the specific benefits of taking part in the test?" Shu Liang was speechless. After a long time, he said, "There are many benefits. Not only can you get fame, but also many opportunities for promotion. Most importantly, it is of great benefit to your future cultivation." After a pause, he continued, "Take county test as an example. As long as you pass it, you will be favored by many clans, chambers of commerce, military headquarters, and schools. They will try their best to win you over and provide you with the wealth and resources you need for cultivation." Lin Sun was surprised. "Why?" Shu Liang said with a smile, "It's very simple. Although it's just a county test, all the participants are young people under the age of 15 with great cultivation. Such people are good seedlings with great potential. If you can win them over and make them a member of your own force, they will definitely bring great benefits to your force in the future." Lin Sun nodded thoughtfully. "I see. But if you don't want to join other forces, there are no other benefits?" Shu Liang said, "Of course not. As long as you pass county test, the Empire will reward you with a sum of money and provide you with the opportunity to take part in state test. As long as you can pass state test, you will get much more benefits than county test. At that time, some big forces will also pay attention to you. If you can pass province test, it will be great. Even if you don't have the opportunity to take part in nation test, you can have a very high status, enjoy endless wealth, and endless cultivation resources. As for nation test, as long as you pass, you can enter Green Deer School. That is the most famous school in the empire and the holy place for cultivation that countless practitioners dream of." When he spoke up to hear, Shuoyang's voice couldn't help but carry a wisp of excitement, and he revealed an expression of admiration. After a long time, Shu Liang calmed down a little and said with a wry smile, "However, it is not easy to enter Green Deer School. Only 100 students are enrolled every year, and 99% of the practitioners who take part in nation test can hardly enter it." Lin Sun silently digested for a long time and couldn't help sighing with emotion. Green Deer School is really powerful. At least the surface of the currency in circulation in the empire is branded with patterns related to it. Shuoyang felt the same way and said, "Isn't that right? By the way, the examinations of the empire to select talents are not easy, and each examination is full of knowledge. If you are willing to take part in it, you can go to Donglin Town to inquire about the specific information. I heard that county test in Donglin Town will begin in 2 months. Lin Sun nodded. "I will think about it carefully." As they talked, they had arrived at the Green Sun tribe. Here, Lin Sun took the initiative to leave. "Uncle Shu Liang, you don't have to see me off." Shu Liang nodded. "Well, take care." Lin soon smiled, turned around and galloped away on the scaly horse. The 2 guards from Keystone Business escorted the goods and followed him. What this little guy did last night seemed to be reckless, but he is clever and has a deep mind. If there is no accident, he will surely make a name for himself in the future. It's a pity that he was born in a remote and poor place with little knowledge and experience. I'm afraid he will encounter many twists and turns in the future. Shu Liang looked into the distance silently until Lin Sun and the others disappeared. Then he turned back and returned to the Green Sun tribe. At the same time, in Wu Business, Wu Deong sat in the hall. His eyes were bloodshot, and his face was extremely gloomy. He had no idea how a boy from Feiyun village could become a distinguished guest of Keystone Business, and even Yanjun, the shopkeeper of Keystone Business, personally stood up for him. Wu Deong had nowhere to vent his anger, so he had to bear it. Keystone Business was too powerful. Not to mention Wu Deong, even the clan of Wu behind him couldn't afford to offend such a behemoth. Compared with Keystone Business, they were as small as an ant in front of a towering tree. If Keystone Business wanted to make trouble for them, Keystone Business could crush them with a flick of its finger. Therefore, they could only bear it. At this time, a servant hurried to report, "Shopkeeper, the boy has left the Green Sun tribe, accompanied by 2 guards of Keystone Business." Hearing this, the last trace of unwillingness in Wu Deong's heart suddenly disappeared, and his face fell. Keystone Business had sent guards to accompany him. This was obviously a warning to Wu Business not to do something too extreme. "Shopkeeper, are we just going to let it go? Mad Dog Wu Jie and others were all killed by this boy. Who in the Green Sun tribe doesn't know about this? If we don't solve this problem, how can we raise our heads in the Green Sun tribe in the future?" A middle-aged man on the side of the hall said angrily, causing others to nod. Wu Deong shouted angrily, "If we don't let it go, do you still want revenge? Do you want Keystone Business to find an excuse to eradicate us all?" The crowd immediately fell silent. After a long time of breathing, Wu Deong calmed down and said, "This matter is over. Don't mention it again in the future." Someone couldn't help saying, "But now there is still no news of Great Deacon Wu Henshui. Are we just going to let it go?" The mention of Wu Henshui made Wu Deong's lips twitch involuntarily. He gritted his teeth and said, "Idiot, that boy single-handedly killed a round trip in the Green Sun tribe. Do you think Wu Henshui can still be alive now?" Everyone was silent. In fact, they also knew that Wu Henshui was probably dead, but they were extremely unwilling to let Lin go like this. This was not only related to their face, but also the reputation of Wu Business in the Green Sun tribe. "Shopkeeper, we can't do it ourselves, but we can find others to do it. Why not hire some desperados to do it?" After a long time, someone made a suggestion, but when Wu Deong heard this, he was so angry that he pounded the table and shouted, "Have you all forgotten what Yanjun said last night? As long as something happens to the boy, no matter whether we did it or not, Keystone Business will eradicate us as soon as possible. Do you know what that means? It means that even if the boy dies in the mouth of the fierce beasts, we will suffer the full revenge of Keystone Business. A bunch of idiots. Don't use your brain when you speak." The crowd was suddenly depressed, and their hearts were about to explode. This Keystone Business had gone too far. Seeing that no one spoke for a long time, Wu Deong took a deep breath and said, "Of course this must be avenged, but not now. Don't forget that Lien Ruffeng, the guard commander of Feiyun village, left with Wu Henshui. I remember that his son, Lien Fei, is now practicing in Donglin town. When the opportunity comes, Lien Fei may come in handy." At the end of his words, his voice had a touch of coldness. Chapter 61. The boundless mountains rose and fell one after another. Galloping between heaven and earth, Lin soon thought of his harvest from the Green Sun tribe with mixed feelings in his heart. Some were relaxed and some were lost, but these were all in the past. Lin Sun had made up his mind to leave with Xia Ji when everything was on the right track. Only by entering the city of Xiao Empire could they have a wider sky. This was the case for both Lin Sun and Xie Ji. Similarly, they couldn't stay in Feiyun village forever for the sake of their future cultivation and finding the enemy who dug away their spiritual veins. This morning, I heard that the golden flame beast had been killed by Shai Yutong, the young Sword King, and the spiritual crystal in its body was also obtained by young Sword King. The spiritual crystal is a priceless treasure. It is said that it is the core treasure of refining the armor of spiritual tattoos. It is extremely rare. The armor of spiritual tattoos? What is it? Only spiritual tattoo masters can refine a powerful equipment for battle. But it's a pity that the spiritual materials needed for such a powerful battle suit are extremely harsh, and it's very complicated and difficult to refine. Even a spiritual tattoo master needs enough opportunities and luck to refine it. So, once the armor of spiritual tattoos is refined successfully, won't it be extremely powerful? Of course. The power of the armor of spiritual tattoos is earth-shattering and unpredictable. Suddenly, a conversation came into Lin Sun's ears, which made him feel excited. The two guards who followed Lin Sun to Feiyun village were from Keystone business. One was Gao Guiyong and the other was Zhou Quan. Both of them were at the 4th level of martial realm. The golden flame beast was killed by young Sword King? Lin Sun asked. When he was in Green Sun tribe, he also heard about the golden flame beast. He had long determined that the so-called golden flame beast was the golden giant beast he had seen a few days ago. Yes, Gao Guiyong said quickly. He knew that the relationship between Lin Sun and Yen Zhen was not trivial, so he dared not neglect Lin Sun. On the other side, Zhou Quan also said, although the golden flame beast was killed, Lu Yukuan couldn't be saved. Lin Sun narrowed his eyes imperceptibly and said in surprise, Lu Yukuan? Yes, it's the eldest son of Lu Wujuan, the governor of the southwestern province of the empire. According to the news, Lu Yukuan and his companions all died in the hands of the golden flame beast, especially Lu Yukuan. I heard that his whole body was burned into a charred corpse. Zhou Quan sighed. I'm afraid this matter will be known by Governor Lu Wujuan in a few days, and I don't know how much trouble it will cause in the future. Only then did Lin Sun know that Lu Yukuan, who had died in his hands, had such a great background. He couldn't help but feel a little strange in his heart. He actually killed the son of a governor by accident, but Lin Sun didn't worry about anything. At least no one knew that Lu Yukuan died in his hands. As night fell, Lin by Sun by night by night. By and by. After eating their rations, Gao Guiyong and Zhou Quan split up. One of them rested for the first half of the night, while the other rested for the second half of the night. They took turns to guard the place. There were many ferocious beasts in the wilderness, so someone had to keep an eye on them. Seeing this, Lin Sun was relieved and began to practice meditating magic. First, he ran the spirit concentrating manual and guided the spiritual energy in his body to circulate 72 times until it was completed. Without any delay, he meditated and practiced meditating magic. It was not until late at night that Lin Sun opened his eyes and glanced around to make sure there was no danger. Then he concentrated his perception and entered the heaven accessing place to break through the barrier of milled waterfalls for the 4th time. In the end, Lin Sun failed again without any suspense. Lin Sun had already prepared for this. Compared with this, he cared more about the improvement of his physical strength. Sure enough, after careful perception, Lin Sun found that his skin, flesh, tendons and bones had been refined again, and his strength was 30% stronger than before. All this was the gift of the Mill Waterfall's current in the spiritual tattoo battlefield. Although he failed every time, it was of great benefit to refining his body. But this time, Lin Sun found that his physical strength had reached a limit, like a bottleneck. If he wanted to improve it again, his strength had to undergo a comprehensive transformation. It seems that I have to start from the cultivation. Lin Sun pondered. He didn't know much about body refining, but he could roughly judge that physical strength and cultivation should be complementary to each other. The breakthrough of cultivation was an internal transformation, while the breakthrough of physical strength was an external transformation. Now that his physical strength had reached a bottleneck, he naturally had to break through from the inside to the outside. Now that Lin Sun's spiritual cultivation had reached the great accomplishment of the aperture guiding level, the fourth level of martial realm, he only needed one step to reach the mastery, and then he could break through the marrow cleansing, the fifth level of martial realm. But Lin Sun didn't worry about it. According to his calculation, he could smoothly enter the fifth level of martial realm within a month with the blood marrow grits and the power of the wine of 4 seasons accumulated in his body last time. At that time, the breakthrough of internal cultivation would inevitably lead to the breakthrough of his physical cultivation, so that his physical strength could enter a new level. For the time being, Lin Sun didn't need to worry about physical strength and cultivation strength. What really made him frown was the cultivation of spiritual tattoos and soul. The cultivation of soul had the star circulation of meditating magic. The only problem was that the progress was a little slow. So far, the second star in his sea of consciousness hadn't been lit. At present, his cultivation could only be regarded as entering the threshold of star circulation, one of the 3 realms of meditating magic. But the cultivation of spiritual tattoos had stagnated for several months due to the lack of the support of a large amount of spiritual ink, which made Lin feel quite helpless. Fortunately, this time he bought a lot of finished spiritual ink in the Green Sun tribe, which solved the problem. All these were only the cultivation of physical strength, cultivation, soul, and spiritual tattoos. In addition, there was also the cultivation of martial arts. For example, marching boxing was still at the precision level, only one step away from the mastery level, but it couldn't break through. Another example was 6-word saberplay, which had just reached the nuance level. If one wanted to fully master the power of each martial art, he couldn't avoid the 4 realms of elementary, nuance, precision, and mastery level. Lin Sun admitted that he had only mastered marching boxing and 6-word saberplay, but he hadn't mastered all of them to the mastery level, which was a bit unreasonable. What Lin didn't know was that although marching boxing seemed to be a basic martial art, there were very few people in the world who could practice it to the level of precision, not to mention mastery, which was as rare as phoenix feathers and unicorn horns. Similarly, Lin Sun did not know the origin of the 6-word saberplay. But if Master Lu knew that Lin Sun had reached the nuance level of this saberplay, he would be deeply shocked. All in all, the reason why Lin Sun thought so was that he was extremely lacking in knowledge and experience about martial arts. After all, he grew up in the Sunless Mind prison, and almost all his life was focused on spiritual tattoos. Master Lu had never taught him martial arts. Even when he taught marching boxing and 6-word saberplay, it was to refine Lin's body and wrist flexibility, aiming at better inscribing spiritual tattoos instead of fighting. When Lin Sun arrived in Feiyun village, almost all the people he met were ordinary people, so he couldn't learn more about martial arts. That was why he had a misunderstanding about his own martial arts cultivation. When Lin Sun really entered Xiao Empire in the future, there would be no more misunderstandings when he entered the vast world full of practitioners and forces. This was the lack of experience and knowledge. He couldn't be taught or learned, so he could only explore and comprehend by himself. This was the so-called reading 10,000 books and walking 10,000 miles. When Lin Sun opened his eyes, it was just dawn. The mountain wind whistled in from the entrance of the cave in the morning, bringing a refreshing coolness to his soul. After a night of cultivation, Lin Sun was full of strength and refreshed. He got up and walked out of the cave, only to see Gao Guiyong and Zhou Quan sitting on the scaled horses, waiting for him with their luggage ready. Lin Sun didn't hesitate to mount the scaled horse and set off. On the way, Gao Guiyong and Zhou Quan looked at Lin Sun with a trace of doubt and even a trace of awe. Lin Sun couldn't help being stunned, so he found an opportunity to ask, "Did something happen last night?" Gao Guiyong shook his head. Zhou Quan hesitated for a moment and said, "Child, when you were cultivating last night, your breath suddenly disappeared and we couldn't sense your existence at all. We were so scared that we thought it was an enemy coming to make trouble. But it turned out to be a false alarm." Seeing this, Gao Guiyong also chimed in, "Yes, it was indeed a false alarm. Now it seems that child's cultivation method is extremely unique and has the magical effect of covering one's breath." There was surprise and envy in his voice. A cultivation method that could cover one's breath was not something ordinary people could have. Lin Sun suddenly realized that he might have been in the heaven accessing place at that time, but he didn't explain anything. Zhou Quan's serious words made Lin Sun's heart flutter. He thought to himself that if he met an enemy he couldn't defeat in the future, he could find a secret place to hide. As long as he entered the heaven accessing place, the enemy was doomed to be unable to detect his breath. But there was also a drawback in doing so, which was that Lin Sun would also lose his perception of the outside world. Once he was discovered, he wouldn't even know how he died. Therefore, it was better not to use this method unless it was absolutely necessary. Chapter 62. At the mention of Lin Sun, Mu Wansu, who was standing on one side, suddenly felt agitated. She took a deep breath and said, "It's true. But the boy is good at making trouble. In the end, he needs our keystone business to help him clean up his mess. His intention is really abominable." Shi Xuan was stunned. "What do you mean?" Mu Wansu didn't conceal anything and told Shi Xuan everything that happened that day. Finally, she sneered. "Young master, don't you think this boy is particularly abominable? Even a fox flaunting the tigers shouldn't do this." Shi Xuan was lost in thought. After a long time, he clapped his hands and laughed. "Lin Sun, I used to think he was a good seedling, but now it seems that I underestimated him at that time. It's really rare for a 13-year-old boy to be so shrewd and resourceful." His voice was full of appreciation. This made Mu Wansu almost doubt whether she had heard it wrong. She couldn't help but ask, "Young master, this boy is shameless and cunning. Why do you always praise him?" Shi Xuan stopped smiling and said with emotion, "Let me ask you, was it the first time he entered Green Sun Tribe that day?" Mu Wansu said, "Yes." "Let me ask you again. As soon as he entered Green Sun Tribe, instead of keeping a low profile, he killed Mad Dog Wu Jie and others in public. Do you know why?" Mu Wansu said indignantly, "There's no need to guess. He must have made up his mind to let Keystone Business stand up for him. That's why he dares to be so fearless." Shi Xian smiled and said, "That's right. However, you are mistaken about one thing. I was the one who gave him that token in the first place. If he did not make use of it, what value would the token have in his hands?" Mu Wansu was stunned and immediately frowned, but even if he wanted our help, he could have informed us in advance. But he acted first and reported later, which put our Keystone Business in a passive position. How could it be? After a pause, she gritted her teeth and said, "The most hateful thing is that after he entered Keystone Business, he not only didn't humble himself, but also started a fight, which embarrassed everyone present. If I hadn't been there, I'm afraid that there would have been a big mess." Shi Xuan sighed and said, "This is exactly what he wants." Mu Wansu's frown deepened. She suddenly found that her child's opinion of Lin Sun didn't change after she said so much. On the contrary, he seemed to appreciate Lin Sun more. This caused Mu Wansu to feel aggrieved in her heart, and she said, "I know he did it on purpose, and his objective was to draw out manager Yan Zhen." Shi Xuan shook his head. "This is just one of his purposes. The more important thing is to tell everyone that Lin Sun is in Keystone Business." Hearing this, Mu Wansu was completely stunned. "Why would he do that?" Shi Xuan asked. If Lin Sun took the initiative to come here and proposed that keystone business deal with Wu Business, would you and Yanjun agree? Mu Wansu hesitated. Although she was unwilling, she had to admit it. She said, I don't think so. He is just a country boy. Even if he has your token, we will save his life at most. If we fall out with Wu Business because of him, it is not in the interest of keystone business. Shi Xuan nodded and said, Yan Zhen will certainly do the same, so Lin Sun can only take an unconventional approach. With this move, he will draw people of Wu Business to keystone business and force you to make a decision. If keystone business flinched, it will inevitably become the laughing stock of Green Sun Tribe, and the reputation of the whole keystone business will be damaged. If keystone business chooses to keep the peace and only protect Lin Sun, it will be too narrow-minded. On the contrary, it will seem that keystone business is afraid of Wu Business. If it is known by others, it will also damage the reputation of keystone business. Speaking of this, Shi Xuan couldn't help laughing. You have seen the result. Wu Business was forced to admit defeat, and Lin Sun became the final winner. Hearing this, Mu Wansu thought of Lin Sun's actions that night and thought about it with Shi Xuan's words. Inexplicably, she felt a touch of horror in her heart. She said, Young master, don't you think too highly of him? Shi Xuan said indifferently, I know you are prejudiced against Lin Sun. But if you really calm down, you will not think so. Mu Wansu fell into silence, but her heart couldn't calm down for a long time. She silently thought about all the actions of Lin Sun that night, but still found it difficult to agree with him. Don't forget, he's just a teenager from a remote mountain village. He's only 13 or 14 years old. It's his first time entering a place like the Green Sun Tribe, yet he's already able to turn the tides overnight. All he's been relying on is a token that's useless to me. Shi Xuan sighed with emotion. Not simple, not simple. Mu Wansu was obviously a little discouraged, but she was still not convinced. She said, This is your token. How can it be useless? If it were not for this token, I am afraid he would have been cut into pieces by Wu Business. Shi Xuan frowned and glanced at Mu Wansu. He said, If it were not for this token, according to Lin Sun's wisdom and skills, there would be other solutions. At least, he would not have exposed his identity to Wu Business so quickly. Remember, never act on impulse, or you are bound to suffer a big loss in the future. Mu Wansu looked solemn and nodded. You are right. I will bear it in mind. Shi Xuan thought for a while and suddenly asked, Wansu, have you ever been to the Forbidden City? Mu Wansu shook her head. It is the capital. I am afraid I will never have the chance to enter it in my life. Shi Xuan continued, If one day you have the opportunity to enter the Forbidden City, but you are targeted by some enemies who want to kill you when you just enter the city. These enemies are very powerful, and you have no power to fight against them. What will you do? Mu Wansu pursed her lips and said, Either run away or seek protection from others. Shi Xuan said, But if others don't want to offend these enemies, what will you do? Mu Wansu's expression suddenly changed. She suddenly understood that Shi Xuan was comparing her with Lin Sun. Indeed, Lin Sun came to the Green Sun Tribe from a remote mountain village, just like Mu Wansu came to the Forbidden City from Donglin Town. In the same situation, what would she do? Mu Wansu completely understood. She took a deep breath and bowed. Thank you for your advice, young master. In her heart, Mu Wansu still retained her prejudice against Lin Sun. This guy had taken advantage of her too many times and made her suffer again and again. How could she forgive him so easily? Mu Wansu had made up her mind. Although the young master appreciated Lin Sun, she would never give Lin Sun a chance to take advantage of her in the future. Shi Xuan smiled and waved his hand. It's just a trifle. Just pay attention to it in the future. After all, Lin Sun is too young and inexperienced. I'm afraid it will take a long time for him to rise. If he can break into the Forbidden City one day, maybe I will invite him to keystone business in person. As for now, just take it as a good karma with him. Whether he is a dragon or a snake, it all depends on him. Mu Wansu nodded repeatedly. That's right. Shi Xuan glanced at her and couldn't help shaking his head. He knew that Mu Wansu's prejudice against Lin Sun could not be resolved in a short time, so he didn't say anything more. Suddenly, Shi Xuan seemed to think of something and said in a low voice, "Now Shai Yutong has killed the golden flame beast and left with the origin spiritual crystal. I'm afraid that he wants to return home and ask the elders of his family to help him refine the scarlet butterfly jade armor. If he succeeds in refining it, his fighting capacity will only become more horrible in the future. At that time, the top 30 of the golden list of Spirit Sea of the Empire will have some changes." Mu Wansu was surprised. "Is the scarlet butterfly jade armor so powerful?" Shi Xuan nodded. "That's the secret of Xie family in Black Clothes Alley. When used with the sword scripture, it can produce incredible power." Speaking of this, Shi Xuan stood up and said with a determined look, "It's time for me to go home. Shai Yutong has his own chance, but I can't admit defeat." Mu Wansu hurriedly said, "Young master, if you leave, what about the peerless treasure? Do you just give it up?" Shi Xuan shook his head and said, "There's no need to investigate it anymore. If I'm right, this treasure may not exist at all. Even if it exists, I'm afraid it has already been obtained by others. Don't forget that the peerless treasure mentioned by the Flamen of the Imperial Observatory is originally a speculation, not a fact. In this case, it's not worth wasting more energy." Saying this, he pushed the door open and floated away. On this day, not only Shi Xuan left, but also many other top figures who gained nothing in the 3,000 mountains also floated away disheartened. The storm caused by the peerless treasure came to an end after Shai Yutong killed the golden flame beast. But the storm about the 3,000 mountains didn't end because of this. The turmoil caused by Lu Yuquan's death had just begun. But for now, all this had nothing to do with Lin Sun for the time being. After running for another day, Lin Sun finally saw the familiar Feiyun village in the evening, and his worried heart was completely relieved. Along the way, there were no more twists and turns except for several fierce beasts attacked. Uncle Lin Sun is back. A group of kids who were playing at the entrance of the village cheered at once when they saw Lin Sun, and ran to the village to spread the news. Before long, the village head Shirao Tianren came with a group of villagers, all looking excited and happy. Lin Sun also felt warm in his heart. Perhaps only in Feiyun village could he enjoy the warmth that others couldn't give him, which was very precious. Lin Sun dismounted from the horse, introduced Gao Guiyong and Zhou Quan to Shirao Tianren, and briefly talked about the harvest this time. Then he left everything else and hurried home alone. He didn't see Xia Ji just now. Although it had only been 4 or 5 days, he was really worried about how the little girl was doing these days. When he pushed open the gate and walked into the courtyard, Lin Sun saw Xia Ji sitting at the stone table under the weeping willow, eating alone. The setting sun sprinkled fine golden halos on the little girl, making her look exceptionally tranquil and holy. Seeing Lin Sun, Xia Ji stood up, took out a pair of chopsticks from the kitchen, and filled a bowl of spiritual rice for Lin Sun. She put it on the opposite side of the stone table and said, "Let's eat." There was no excitement, no cheering, and not even a little concern. But Lin Sun smiled, and his heart was full of warmth. If he remembered correctly, this should be the first time Xia Ji helped him with a bowl and chopsticks since she came into his life, and also the first time she helped him fill a bowl of rice. This was the way Xia Ji welcomed him back, as unique as her. Chapter 63. That night, under the leadership of Shirao Tianren, the village head, all the villagers gathered in the ancestral hall and began to distribute the daily necessities. This time, Lin Sun brought back a large number of items, including cloth, clothes, oil, salt, vinegar and other daily necessities, as well as some seeds of spiritual grains, spiritual vegetables and spiritual herbs, as well as tools such as hoes and sickles for farming in spiritual fields. When all the necessities were distributed, the villagers were extremely excited. In the past, when Lien Rufeng was the guard commander, the daily necessities he brought back could barely meet the needs of food and clothing. But what Lin Sun brought back today was not only abundant, but also varied. Comparing the two, it was obvious which was better. Most importantly, each household got 3 imperial silver coins, which was equivalent to 300 imperial copper coins. For the villagers who had never walked out of the 3,000 mountains, this was already a considerable amount of wealth. All these made the villagers more grateful to Lin Sun, and Lin Sun's reputation in the village reached an unprecedented height. Until late at night, the villagers left one after another, leaving only Lin Sun and the village head, Shirao Tianren, in the ancestral hall. What's the use of giving money to the villagers? They will stay in Feiyun all their lives. How can they have the chance to spend money? Shirao Tianren sighed, feeling that Lin Sun was too extravagant and didn't need to do so. It may not be useful now, but it may be useful in the future. Lin Sun smiled. What's more, the money is from selling Feiyun fire copper. Just take it as your salary for mining. Shirao Tianren said grumpily. The salary is at most 30 imperial copper coins. How can it be worth 3 imperial silver coins? Lin Sun smiled without saying anything. Although he had promised Shirao Tianren a long time ago that the villagers would only receive some salary when mining Feiyun fire copper, he would not take any profit. But how could Lin Sun really treat the villagers as servants working for him? In his eyes, Feiyun village was no different from his own home, and the villagers were his relatives. Naturally, they should have a share of the wealth he earned. On this point, Lin Sun would never be stingy with his financial resources. Alas, I really don't know what to say to you. Shirao Tianren sighed helplessly. In fact, Lin's action moved him a lot. Seeing that it was too late to turn back, he had to give up. Uncle Xiao, I believe that Feiyun village will only get better in the future. We should have a long-term vision. For the sake of the future, we must make everyone rich first. In this way, maybe all of us can live in the city one day. Lin Sun said seriously. Don't you want your children and grandchildren to get out of poverty so that they can live a better life like the children in the city? Shirao Tianren was moved and fell into silence. At this moment, he was indeed moved by the beautiful vision described by Lin Sun. Yes, the villagers had been poor all their lives. Did they want the next generation to continue living in poverty? Of course not. Without saying anything more, Lin Sun got up and left. He knew clearly that it would take more than one day to change the situation. When the villagers of Feiyun village became rich with the income from the Feiyun fire copper mine, they would naturally think about long-term things. The so-called survival and life were two completely different states. In the past, the villagers of Feiyun village solved the problem of survival, which was the most important thing. But when they solved the problem of survival, they would naturally consider the quality of life and the cultivation of the next generation of children. Now, the Feiyun fire copper mine provided Feiyun village with a solution to the problem of survival and pursuit of life. Lin Sun was very sure that even if he left, the lives of the villagers would only get better and better. Of course, the premise was that no accidents happened. But considering the credibility and responsibility of Keystone business, there was no need to worry about it. The next morning, Gao Guiyong and Zhou Quan left. They had finished their task and reached an agreement with Shirao Tianren that they would come to purchase Feiyun fire copper in person every month and bring daily necessities for the villagers. It was a mutually beneficial deal. The only difference was that the place of transaction was in Feiyun village, which saved the villagers from many unnecessary risks. Also in the morning, Lin Sun gathered Yingluer and the other 3 children, who had stepped into the first level of martial realm, and gave them the Qi-drawing elixir, internal strengthening pill, body-opening powder, and other elixirs purchased from Green Sun tribe. There were originally more than 20 children in the village, but regrettably, only 4 of them were able to sense Qi and draw it into their bodies. In other words, amongst these 20-plus children, only Inglur and the other 3 had stepped foot onto the path of cultivation, whereas the other children didn't have much hope. This was the reality. Only a few people in the world could become practitioners. From this day on, Lin Sun unloaded the responsibility of martial arts master in the village. He had taught all that he could, and the rest was up to the children to practice by themselves. As the saying goes, the master leads the way, but the cultivation depends on the individual. Whether it was eradicating Lien Rufeng and his followers or suppressing Wu business with the help of Keystone business, they were all for the purpose of eliminating hidden dangers for Feiyun village. Excavating Feiyun fire copper and training the children to practice martial arts was for the future development of Feiyun village. Now all these things had been carried out smoothly, and Lin Sun had completely extricated himself from all kinds of trivial affairs. But Lin Sun didn't relax at all. With the guarantee of many materials, Lin Sun didn't need to worry about food and cultivation anymore. He practiced martial arts and inscribing spiritual tattoos during the day, and refined his cultivation and soul at night. Every 3 days, he would enter the spiritual tattoo battlefield, Mill Waterfalls, to break through. He made full use of every bit of time. Occasionally, he would spare some time to fight with Xia Ji in body refining, and the insights he gained were all used to perfect his self-created combat skill, separating tendons and dislocating bones. Xia Ji, on the other hand, lived a carefree life except eating and sleeping. Half a month later, with the constant refining of blood marrow grit and the power of wine of 4 seasons, Lin Sun successfully stepped into the 5th level of martial realm, marrow cleansing. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. In the courtyard, Lin Sun's figure moved like lightning, leaving a series of residual shadows in the air. The sky breacher in his hand was like a bolt of lightning, wantonly displaying all kinds of moves of 6-word saberplay. A boulder was thrown over, but it was cut into neat stone strips in the air by layers of saber shadows like tidewater, as easy as cutting tofu. Each stone strip was as thick as a thumb and 3 inches long, exactly the same. Bang! After that, every single stone hadn't even fallen to the ground when they exploded into pieces in unison, and they transformed into fine powder that rustled through the air. Lin Sun's speed and strength could be seen from this blow alone. Besides, the edge of the saber was not only full of sharpness, but also contained a kind of internal strength, which finally turned the boulder into powder and dissipated. Sure enough, after entering the marrow-cleansing realm, my control of power has become stronger. Lin Sun put away his saber and stood still, quietly feeling the nuances of this blow. The marrow-cleansing realm was the 5th level of martial realm. Upon reaching this realm, the whole body's bone marrow would show a silvery luster, as if it had been tempered 1,000 times. This was the so-called refining the blood like pulp and the marrow like frost. At the same time, the advancement to the 5th level of martial realm made Lin Sun's spiritual energy more vigorous, which was twice as strong as before. His chi was surging. Just by standing there casually, Lin Sun looked fierce and aggressive. This was a sign that the chi inside and outside the body had been further improved. The next realm was blood-burning, the 6th level of martial realm. As the name suggested, it was to refine the blood until it boiled like burning and ran in the body, making it full of vigor and vigor. At this stage, the skin, bones, blood, internal organs, chi, and other parts of the practitioner's body would enter a state of true gold fire refinement. Even if the practitioner's cultivation stagnated in the future, he could easily extend his lifespan to over 100 years old. However, for Lin Sun, who had just entered the 5th level of martial realm, there was still a long way to go before he reached the 6th level of martial realm, blood burning. His top priority was to refine his foundation well. After all, he had just entered a new realm, so he needed a period of consolidation to be familiar with the new power. "Are you going to cultivate like this every day?" Xia Ji asked beside him. She was the one who threw the boulder just now. Of course not. Lin soon put away the sky breacher and sat at the stone table. He picked up a cup of iced tea and drank it up, feeling refreshed all over. In about a month, we'll leave here for Donglin town of Xiao Empire. I've thought about it for a long time. If you want to be stronger in the future, you must find a powerful teacher or enter a powerful school to study. Lin Sun said casually, when we enter Donglin town, I'll help you inquire about this information. Xia Ji shook her head. I don't want to be apprenticed. Lin Sun was a little surprised, and then said with a smile, then I'll find a school to study in. There were different academies set up in every city in the empire. They mainly provided guidance on cultivation, but there were also some academies that taught some cultivation skills, such as spirit runes, weaponsmithing, alchemy, music, spirit plants, beast taming, military affairs, and so on. There was a wide variety of courses. Will you go? Xia Ji raised her little face and stared at Lin Sun with her clear and dark eyes, looking serious. Me? Lin Sun thought for a while and shook his head. I'm not sure. If you don't go, I won't go either, said Xia Ji. Lin Sun felt helpless. Let's talk about it later. Anyway, you can't leave me alone. Xia Ji seemed to think of something, and her beautiful and quiet little face was full of firmness. After saying that, she turned around and walked into the room. Seeing Xia Ji's disappearing figure, Lin Sun, who was sitting alone in the courtyard, fell into silence. Chapter 64. Time flew. Half a month passed in the blink of an eye. On this day, Gao Guiyong and Zhou Quan arrived as scheduled and were warmly received by the villagers of Feiyun village. They purchased more than 400 tons of Feiyun fire copper at the price of 700 imperial silver coins. At the same time, Gao Guiyong also brought Lin a letter written by Xu Liang. The content of the letter was very simple. It just told Lin that there was only 1 month left before the county test in Donglin town. If he wanted to participate in it, he should set off for Donglin town as soon as possible. Lin knew that the county test was usually held in December each year, the state test in March of the next year, and the province test in June, 3 months after the state test. As for the nation test, it would be held in September. It was said that in the forbidden city of Xiao Empire, the capital of Xiao Empire, Xiao flowers would bloom as scheduled in September every year, decorating every place in the city like a sea of flowers. It was a first-class spectacle in the world and was known as the Xiao Flower Festival. Those who could successfully pass the nation test were often praised as the best of Xiao, the best of the country. Then they would be arranged to go to the most famous imperial street in the Forbidden City to walk in the sea of Xiao flowers and accept the cheers and praises of the public. This tradition was also called the Journey of the Heavenly Suns. Lin Sun read the letter in his hand for a long time. When dusk fell, he finally made a decision. 3 days later. Before dawn, Lin Sun had packed up his luggage. Holding Xia Ji's little hand, he pushed open the door and walked out of the courtyard. Are you sure you won't tell the others? Xia Ji rarely asked. No, it's not life and death. It's better not to disturb them. Lin Sun shook his head. In fact, he couldn't bear to see the villagers see them off. However, when they arrived at the entrance of the village, they were stunned. It was still dark, and the mountains in the distance were shrouded in darkness. But the entrance of the village was brightly lit by the raging fire. Shirao Tianren and other villagers, old people and children, were all standing there quietly with torches in their hands. Every face was full of reluctance. Many of them even had tears in their eyes, but they tried hard not to cry out. No one spoke. The atmosphere was silent, and only the sound of the wind could be heard. Lin Sun was completely stunned, unable to calm down for a long time. Let's go. Shirao Tianren took a deep breath and said in a low voice, Don't say anything. We just want to send you off. Lin Sun nodded and mounted the scaly horse with Xia Ji in his arms. The horse's hooves knocked on the ground, making a crisp sound, which was particularly loud in this quiet atmosphere. Many children couldn't help but want to rush forward, but they were firmly stopped by the adults by their side. There were also some women who couldn't help but lower their heads and shed tears, feeling indescribably sad in their hearts. Under the lamplight, Lin Sun looked at each face silently. It suddenly occurred to him that he had been living in Feiyun Village for half a year. Not only had Feiyun Village changed a lot, but also he himself had changed a lot. Now that he was leaving, when could he return to his hometown and see his old friends again? Lin! Suddenly, a shout rang in Lin's ears, waking him up from his messy thoughts. He turned around and saw Shirao Tianren, the village head, saying in a low voice, "Remember, Feiyun Village will always be your home. If you're too tired outside, don't force yourself. Feiyun Village will always wait for you to come back." Waiting for you. The villagers couldn't hold back their emotions anymore and shouted in unison. Their voices full of expectation echoed in the night. Lin Sun took a few deep breaths, laughed and waved his hand. Then he drove the scaly horse to gallop away. At that time, the first ray of light tore through the darkness at the break of dawn, sprinkling the first ray of light between heaven and earth, illuminating the mountains and rivers and bathing the young man on the horse in a dazzling light. The frozen scene at that moment was destined to be unforgettable for all the villagers in Feiyun Village. Even when Lin Sun's figure disappeared in the boundless sky, the villagers still didn't disperse. They couldn't help recalling many past events in their minds. When Lin Sun came to Feiyun Village for the first time, who could imagine that it was this young man who helped them resolve one crisis after another? Who could imagine that Feiyun Village had undergone earth-shaking changes in just half a year because of his arrival? The villagers were not stupid. Of course they knew that Lin Sun really regarded Feiyun Village as his home, and they also regarded Lin Sun as one of their own. The only pity was that they all knew that people like Lin Sun were not destined to stay in Feiyun Village for a lifetime. The outside world was his stage. Lin Sun, will we come back in the future? Yes. Those people are very nice. Of course. From now on, it may be difficult for us to meet people who are as nice to us as they are. Yes. Xia Ji, the outside world is very big, and there are many unimaginable dangers. I will do my best to protect you. As long as you don't leave me, I won't feel wronged. Haha, how could I leave you? In the boundless mountains, Lin Sun galloped wildly on the horse. The cold morning wind blew on his face, making his handsome and angular face look extraordinarily firm. Xia Ji sat in Lin Sun's arms with a faint smile on her beautiful and tranquil face. Her world was so small that it could only contain Lin Sun alone. 3 days later, Lin Sun came to Green Sun Tribe and met Shuelyang. He left Green Sun Tribe in the afternoon with a map to Donglin Town given by Shuelyang and headed north. At the same time, Yanzhen, the shopkeeper of Keystone business in Green Sun Tribe, sent a letter to Donglin Town thousands of miles away. The letter was addressed to Mu Wansu, the person in charge of Keystone business in Donglin Town. The content was very simple. It only said, Lin Sun has gone to Donglin Town and is expected to arrive in 2 days. The letter was carried by a green feather falcon and fell into Mu Wansu's hands in only 6 hours. At that time, Mu Wansu was taking a bath. Seeing the letter, she tore it up and said leisurely, "Come on. Anyway, I have the final say in Keystone business in Donglin Town. As long as you little bastard are in Donglin Town, don't expect to have anything to do with Keystone business." As she said, she got up from the bathtub. Her graceful and proud white body was covered with water droplets, as if it was shining with an attractive luster. Mu Wansu put on a loose bathrobe and stood in front of a huge bronze mirror, wiping her wet hair with a clean towel. There was a kind of indescribable beauty in her languid manner. Immediately, she seemed to think of something. A pair of black eyebrows raised sharply like a blade. No, Keystone business can't even buy and sell goods with this little bastard in the future. We must cut off any contact with him. Didn't the eldest child say that this little bastard will become a great person in the future? I'd like to see whether he can keep a foothold in Donglin Town without the help of Keystone business. Thinking of this, Mu Wansu's red and full lips curled up into a smile, and her beautiful eyes became blurred. She murmured, Lin Sun, don't blame me for being ruthless. It's you who made me angry before. You must remember in the future that if a woman misses you, the consequences will be terrible. At the same time, in Wu business of Green Sun tribe. Shopkeeper, we've sent someone to Feiyun village to investigate. Deacon Wu Henshui and his subordinates, including Lien Ruffeng, have all disappeared. I'm afraid the result is just as you expected. They've all met with an accident. In addition, just this evening, the spy sent back the news that Lin Sun has set off for Donglin Town, accompanied by only a little girl. A subordinate came to report. Wu Deong listened quietly, and his face changed for a long time. Finally, he gritted his teeth and said, of all the places to go, he chose to go to Donglin Town. Isn't he throwing himself into a trap? That's the base camp of Wu family. Although Keystone Business also has industries in Donglin Town, as long as we seize the opportunity, we may be able to take advantage of the situation to get rid of this boy. For a whole month, whenever Wu Deong thought of Wu Henshui who disappeared and Mad Dog Wu Jie and others who were killed, he felt like needles in his heart. Especially since the matter was stopped by Keystone Business that day, the reputation of Wu business in the Green Sun tribe had plummeted to the bottom, becoming a laughingstock. This made Wu Deong more resentful. Now, hearing that Lin Sun was going to Donglin Town to make a living, Wu Deong immediately smelled the smell of opportunity. As he said, Donglin Town was the base camp of Clan of Wu, and its power was intertwined. Although Keystone Business was a first-class behemoth in the empire, it could only be regarded as an outsider in Donglin Town after all. As the saying goes, a powerful dragon cannot suppress a snake in its own territory. Wu Deong was very clear that there were thousands of ways to kill people. It was not necessary to deal with Lin Sun openly. As long as he arranged some means and was careful, it was enough to eradicate Lin Sun silently. At that time, even if this matter was known by Keystone Business, Clan of Wu would never admit that it was done by themselves, and the consequences would naturally not be so serious. Having figured this out, Wu Deong could no longer hold back. That night, he hurriedly left Green Sun tribe with several guards and rushed to Donglin Town. Shopkeeper, bad news. Wu Deong has taken people to Donglin Town at night. I'm afraid that he has heard the news about Lin Sun and intends to harm him. In Keystone Business, Shu Liang hurriedly found Yen Zhen and said worriedly, Don't worry. I've sent a message to Miss Wansu. Yen Zhen said indifferently, with Miss Wansu's help, no matter how rampant Clan of Wu is, how dare they offend Keystone Business because of Lin Sun? Hearing this, Shu Liang was relieved. But neither Yen Zhen nor Shu Liang knew that Mu Wansu had made a plan to draw a clear line with Lin Sun. Similarly, Lin Sun probably didn't know that so many things had happened secretly because of his trip to Donglin Town. Chapter 65. Li Ji's Bookstore in Dongxin City. This was an unremarkable small bookstore, located in the deep corner of a bustling street. It was quite remote, so business was naturally poor. The owner, surnamed Li, was an old man in his twilight years. At this time, he was drowsily supporting his forehead with his hand behind the counter. In the bookstore, there was only a teenager selecting books in front of the bookshelf. The atmosphere was quiet. The teenager was about 13 or 14 years old, but he was thin and slender, with a delicate and warm face. He was dressed in coarse gray clothes, but looked fresh and clean. It was Lin Sun. Before long, Lin Sun selected 4 more books and came to the counter. He said softly, "Uncle." The old man suddenly woke up and said with a smile, "Well, let me have a look. Imperial Mountains and Rivers, Imperial History, Basic Handbook of Cultivation, Spiritual Tattoo Collection." The old man raised his head and said in surprise, "Nowadays, young people are rarely interested in these kinds of knowledge. It's rare to see someone who likes reading as much as you do. Lin soon smiled slightly. Uncle, how much are these 4 books? The old man said casually, 20 copper coins if you want. After paying, Lin soon picked up the books and hurried out of the bookstore. The night outside was as dark as ink, but the rows of buildings in the distance were brightly lit, as beautiful as stars falling to the earth. Lin soon hurried along the street in the night breeze. Before long, he turned into a shop called Tiger Fruit Juice. He took out 5 copper coins and bought a large cup of sweet and sour cloud fruit juice. This was the signature drink of Tiger Berry Shop. It was blended with several spiritual materials such as poria leaf, purple floating vine, cloud fragrant fruit, and some spiritual vegetables. Not only did it taste sweet, the key was that it didn't have many impurities. It was extremely suitable for cultivators to drink. Holding the books and fruit juice, Lin soon shuttled through the crisscrossing streets without a moment's rest. Before long, he came to an extremely prosperous and spacious street. The streets were filled with people and endless streams of horses and carriages. Multicolored lights adorned the buildings on both sides of the street. It was gorgeous and bright. Many passers-by wore gorgeous clothes. Treasure carriages shuttled back and forth. From time to time, practitioners riding scaly horses, antlers and other mounts galloped past. Some peddlers set up their stalls and frequently called out. The bustling noise continued to ferment in the air above this bustling street. This was the most famous street in Donglin town. It was 8,000 feet long, so it was also called 800 Street. In the center of this street, there were all kinds of top businesses, restaurants, inns, elixir stores, and spiritual material stores in Donglin town. Everything that one could ever want could be found here. Each shop was a well-known money-squandering den in Donglin town, backed by various influential cities. Therefore, almost all the customers were practitioners with high social status, which ordinary people could not afford. At the east end of 800 Street, there was a school named Donglin School, which was sponsored by the imperial government. Every year, it would recruit students and impart knowledge to them. It was very famous. As long as one passed the examination, he could practice in it after paying the tuition fee. Among all the cultivators in Donglin town who were interested in cultivation, it was a great honor to be able to study in Donglin School. Lin soon happened to pass by Donglin School on his way. He couldn't help but take a few more glances at it. The school occupied a large area, with buildings scattered all over the place. From time to time, students came and went in the buildings. After standing there and watching silently for a moment, Lin soon turned around and left. At this time, a group of young boys and girls came from the opposite side. They were all dressed in gorgeous marten coats and were in high spirits, which made them stand out from the crowd. 1 month later, I can take part in county test. I have already reached the 3rd level of martial realm, which is enough to pass the test easily. Ha ha ha, among us, which one of us is under 15 years old, and which one of us has not reached the 3rd level of martial realm? County test is a piece of cake for us. Right, county test is not worth worrying about at all. What we should really consider is whether we should directly go to Green Maple County to take part in state test in March next year after passing county test. You can't say that. This time, there are as many as 3,000 students in our Donglin school who will take part in county test, and only 1,000 are admitted. In this way, 2,000 people will be directly eliminated. Don't be careless. Alas, I'm also worried about this. As these young men and women walked, they chattered incessantly, and the topics of their discussion were all focused on the capital test. Lin soon was about to pay more attention to them. Unfortunately, those young boys and girls had all walked into Donglin School. Obviously, they were all students of Donglin School. Seeing this, Lin soon didn't want to catch up with them. I didn't expect so many people to take part in county test, and 2,000 people will be eliminated. That is to say, even if I meet the conditions of passing the test, I may not be admitted. Lin soon thought as he walked. The so-called admission was to get the certificate of passing county test, and this certificate was one of the conditions for taking part in state test. Not long after, Lin Sun's figure disappeared from the 800 Avenue. After walking for half an hour, he entered a deserted, dark and dilapidated street. This was the civilian area of Donglin Town, and most of the people living there were at the bottom of society. Compared with the prosperity of other places, this civilian area was undoubtedly extremely dilapidated, and the people living there were all kinds of people mixed together. The public security here was also very poor. Every day, thieves, hooligans and murderers came and went. It was extremely chaotic. Lin Sun wouldn't have arranged his residence here if he had a choice. Lin Sun walked along a dark alley with dirty water stains under his feet, and the barking of wild dogs and cats came from afar from time to time. At the corner of the alley, a man with a protruding mouth and monkey cheeks suddenly rushed out and greeted Lin Sun with a smile. "Hi, buddy, are you alone?" Crack! As soon as the man raised his hand, Lin Sun grasped it and broke the man's wrist with his palm and fingers. The man's raised palm loosened and a small blade with cold light fell to the ground, making a clanking sound. The man felt pain and was about to scream, but he was knocked out by Lin Sun with a slap. His body went limp and fell beside the dirty road. From the beginning to the end, all the actions happened in a flash, neat and tidy, and came to an end in an instant. Lin Sun seemed to be used to this kind of thing. With a natural and calm look, he walked forward. Not long after Lin Sun left, two sneaky figures appeared at the corner of the alley again. When they saw the man who fainted on the ground, one of the fat men couldn't help but gloat. "How many has it been?" The other man counted with his fingers. "The young master moved in 7 days ago. This is the 19th person who has been killed by him." "Haha, Rotten Head Zhang used to be a clever man, but he is so stupid today that he wants to kill this young master. Doesn't he know how Snake Boss died? He has eyes but fails to see. Now in this area, who doesn't know that there is a ruthless young master who kills people without blinking in courtyard 49 deep in the alley? Well, it's time for us to take action." As they said, the two men leaned over and groped the man called Rotten Head Zhang. After getting more than 10 copper coins, they left happily. In courtyard 49 deep in the alley, Lin Sun pushed the door open and entered. Boom! A gust of wind from a fist tore through the air, and it was filled with a terrifying aura. It smashed into the air, causing the air to explode and scatter, emitting a dull explosion. Lin Sun didn't move and said helplessly, "It's me." Suddenly, the fist wind disappeared and everything returned to calm. The young and delicate figure of Xia Ji appeared in front of him. "I know it's you. If it were someone else, he would have died." Xia Ji stepped forward, took a cup of cloudy fruit juice from Lin Sun naturally, and turned away. Lin Sun shrugged his shoulders with a smile and followed her in. The courtyard was not large. In the center of the courtyard, there was a big locust tree with an umbrella-like crown and shade. On the other side there were 2 houses and a kitchen. After thorough cleaning, it was quite quiet and tidy. In the room, a southern spirit incense candle was lit. The candlelight was bright and emitted a trace of calming fragrance. Lin Sun sat at the desk, reading the books he had bought. Xia Ji sat quietly on a stool on one side, sipping the cloudy fruit juice in the cup. 7 days ago they came to Donglin Town. However, when they were looking for a place to live, they found that it was impossible for Lin Sun to rent a good place in the town with only 300 silver coins. Living in an inn was not only expensive but also unsuitable for long-term living with too many people. Lin Sun had no choice but to rent this courtyard in the civilian area. The rent was surprisingly cheap, only 30 silver coins a year. But after 7 days of living, Lin Sun finally understood why the rent was so cheap. It was because this place was too chaotic, with crooks mixed in with honest people and all kinds of scums. On the first day, a man nicknamed Snakehead led a group of local ruffians to collect protection fees. On the second day, Lin Sun went out to buy daily necessities. When he returned home, he saw 3 dead bodies lying in the courtyard. After asking Xie Ji, he found that they were 3 thieves. On the 3rd day, Lin Sun was stopped in the street by a group of people who had been lying in ambush and wanted to rob him. On the 4th day, Lin Sun met a group of villains who tried to rob a woman. He immediately went to her rescue, but it turned out that the woman was in cahoots with those villains. On the 5th day, in a word, in the 7 days since Lin Sun moved here, all kinds of thieves, hooligans, scoundrels and villains came and went like wild dogs smelling blood. Of course, those people had a miserable end, and many of them had even disappeared from the world. But Lin Sun was very clear that if he dealt with these thieves every day, it was hard to guarantee that nothing would go wrong. Most importantly, he had Xie Ji by his side. He didn't want the little girl to grow up in such a dirty and dangerous environment. As for the reason, it was very simple. Lin Sun grew up in the dark environment of the mine prison. Since he was a child, he had seen many cruel, cunning, bloody and vicious tricks, as well as many villains whose hands were stained with blood. Compared to these villains, the local ruffians who occupied this civilian area were as pure as white lotuses. They were as obedient as inexperienced chicks, and they were not intimidating at all. Lin Sun knew that if there had been no Master Lu, he would have been infected by this environment since he was a child, and would have sunk into the dark road and become inhumane. In view of this, Lin Sun naturally wouldn't let Xie Ji live in such a dirty and dark environment. But if he wanted to move, he would need a huge sum of money, which Lin Sun couldn't do for the time being. So now, what Lin Sun was most concerned about was not how to pass the county test, but how to make money. Chapter 66. Without money, one couldn't do anything. After entering Donglin town, Lin Sun deeply understood the meaning of this sentence. Clothing, food, shelter, and transportation all needed money, and as a practitioner, his expenses were far beyond the imagination of ordinary people. For example, ordinary people only needed food, but practitioners were different. In order to keep their bodies pure, they had to eat spiritual grains, spiritual vegetables, and ferocious beasts' flesh and blood as ingredients, and the price of spiritual grains and spiritual vegetables was frighteningly high. There were even some practitioners with strong family backgrounds who would consume panaceas to replenish their body's needs in order to hone and refine their cultivation at all times. The value of these treasures was not something that an ordinary practitioner could afford. In addition, the clothes worn by practitioners, the mounts they rode, the battle equipment they used, and the cultivation methods they needed, all required a lot of money. Why was there a saying in the world that the poor study and the rich practice? That was to say, only the children of rich families with strong family background could not worry about money and concentrate on practicing martial arts. As for the poor, even if they had the aptitude for cultivation, they couldn't make bricks without straw. Because of the lack of all kinds of cultivation resources, they were doomed to not go far on the road of cultivation in the future. Why did the county test held by the empire every year attract so many practitioners to participate in it? Even many practitioners from poor families regarded the county test as an opportunity for them to leap over the dragon gate. Because as long as they passed the county test, these practitioners from poor families could win the favor of many chambers of commerce, clans, and aristocratic families, who would take them under their command and provide them with the support of cultivation resources. Everything was for the sake of cultivation, but it was impossible to cultivate without the support of money. During the 7 days in Donglin town, Lin Sun often went out for nothing else but to familiarize himself with and integrate into the imperial city as soon as possible. It was also the experience of these 7 days that made Lin Sun realize the importance of money deliberately. Donglin town was different from Green Sun tribe. Green Sun tribe couldn't compare with Donglin town in terms of prosperity. There were unimaginable cultivation resources in the city, but it was extremely difficult to obtain them. Especially for Lin Sun, this was the first time in his life that he stepped into a city. It was even more difficult for him to settle down in this densely populated place with strong practitioners and complicated forces. Make money. This was the most urgent matter. This was Lin's current idea. Only by making enough money could he and Xia Ji move to a new living environment, obtain more cultivation resources, and live a better life in Xiao Empire. At the desk, Lin Sun suddenly sighed softly. Summer Solstice looked up and asked, "What's wrong?" Lin Sun closed the book in his hand and shook his head. Nothing. The name of the book was Imperial Mountains and Rivers, which he had just bought from Li Ji's bookstore tonight. It was a book about the mountains, rivers, geography and latitude of Xiao Empire. Lin had intended to find out where the mine prison where he had lived was located, but he could only find the location of 3,000 mountains. Further south was the wasteland of turbulence, where the Empire of the Dark, the mortal enemy of Xiao Empire, was entrenched. Lin Sun still remembered that he was pushed into a deep mine tunnel by Master Lu and then lost consciousness. When he woke up again, he was already in the 3,000 mountains. This made him suspect that the mine prison where he had lived was probably located somewhere in the 3,000 mountains. It was a pity that the 3,000 mountains were so vast and boundless that even imperial mountains and rivers didn't have a specific description of it. But this book was not bad. Lin Sun finally understood that the land under his feet was called the Tsangtu mainland, which was vast and boundless. And Xiao Empire was just one of the known countries on the Tsangtu mainland. "Are you still thinking about moving?" Xia Ji suddenly frowned and asked. "Yes." Lin Sun answered casually and opened another book named Handbook of Cultivation Basic. As the name suggested, it talked about the knowledge of cultivation. Although the content was simple, it was well organized. The book was divided into 5 parts according to the 5 realms of Martial Realm. Martial Realm, Gang Spirit, Sea of Spirit, Tao Insight, and Wheel Developing. For example, the 9 levels of Martial Realm, from the first level of Qi guiding to the last level of spiritual transformation, were all described. However, these were all theoretical knowledge instead of real cultivation experience. It could only let the readers know what the realm was like, what changes one could have after reaching this realm, and what the specific signs of advancement were. Although the content was very simple, Lin Sun read it with great interest. He knew how to cultivate, but what he lacked was the mastery of cultivation theory. No need to move. I like it here. Xia Ji also picked up a book named Imperial History and flipped through it. Lin Sun raised his head and looked at Xia Ji in surprise. "You like it here?" Xia Ji said without raising her head, "It's rare that you can fight at any time here. If you move out, you will have no opponent to fight with. It's too boring." Speaking of this, she also raised her head and looked at Lin Sun seriously. "Do you know what I felt the most during those days in Feiyun village?" Lin Sun smiled bitterly and roughly guessed what Xia Ji was going to say. As expected, Xia Ji said the next moment, "It's boredom. I have analyzed my strength and confirmed a fact. If I don't fight, my strength will gradually weaken." Lin Sun was slightly surprised and said with his eyes fixed, "That is to say, only by fighting constantly can your strength not weaken?" Xia Ji nodded. "More than that. Only by fighting can I become stronger. I don't need cultivation or cultivation methods. What I need is just fighting." Lin Sun was stunned and suddenly realized a problem. He had always subconsciously regarded Xia Ji as a 5 or 6-year-old girl and had always tried his best to protect her. Although he had long known that Xia Ji was different from other children, he had never seriously thought about what Xia Ji really needed. At such a young age, she could easily kill Wu Henshui, who was on the 8th level of Martial Realm, and could live in the deep mountains and forests where fierce beasts lurked everywhere. Even his fighting capacity was far inferior to hers. So, what on earth did she need? Lin Sun didn't think about it before. He only knew that Xia Ji liked to eat, sleep, and live a simple and carefree life. But after listening to Xia Ji's words, Lin Sun completely understood that Xia Ji had her own way of cultivation, her own ideas, and the life she wanted. Lin Sun pondered for a long time and said, "I see." Then he scratched his head and said, "But fighting means killing. Do you know what it means?" Xia Ji nodded. "I only kill enemies." Lin Sun smiled bitterly, "But we don't have many enemies." Xia Ji asked in reply, "Really?" Lin Sun thought for a while and fell silent. Did he really have no enemies? Of course. The enemy who dug out his spiritual vein, the one who destroyed the mind prison, and the one who made Master lose life and death uncertain could all be counted as enemies. But for the current Lin Sun, it seemed that it was too far away to solve these hatred. Your enemy seems to be the barbarian warrior. Lin Sun suddenly remembered that when he saw Xia Ji for the first time, she was being chased by a barbarian warrior of Sea Spirit Realm. I remember him. When I become stronger, I will kill him myself. Summer Solstice's expression was tranquil, and her voice was also very calm, as if for her, this matter was already destined to be done. Fight, fight. Lin Sun hesitated for a while. What Xia Ji needed was to fight, but he couldn't help her at all. Don't worry. I like fighting, but it doesn't mean I can't survive without fighting, Xia Ji said seriously. Lin Sun breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "That's good." Xia Ji paid no more attention to him. Instead, she raised the book in her hand, pointed at a paragraph on the last page, and said, "I fight to become stronger, but this man was born to fight. This is the difference between me and him." Lin Sun was curious and took it over. It read, "I was born with the luck of heaven and earth, and live for fighting. The glory of this life should be poured with the blood of enemies. If I die, I should take the battlefield as my grave and the bones of my enemies as my coffin. My head rests on the mountain of corpses and my body lies in the sea of blood. I will sleep with the sky and the earth. In this way I will have no regrets." Ningbugue, the Blood King of Xiao Empire. Just these words made Lin Sun's blood boil and a fighting spirit rise in his chest. He couldn't help but praise. The spirit of the Iron Blood King is so great that it can compete with the sun and the moon and compete with the ages. Speaking of this, he looked at Xia Ji, who was sitting quietly on one side, and said thoughtfully, "You are really different." A faint smile appeared at the corner of Xia Ji's mouth. At that moment, her beauty seemed to make the room more dazzling. Fortunately, the smile disappeared in a flash. Even so, Lin Sun couldn't help reminding her, "Xia Ji, don't show your face in public in the future." She was only 5 or 6 years old, but her beauty was too much. If she was seen by others, it would cause many unexpected disasters. Xia Ji raised her little face and answered seriously. Lin Sun smiled and said no more. He turned around and sat at the desk, taking out an inscribing pen, a swallow-wing knife, and a plate of finished spiritual ink. The inscribing pen was made of the leg bone of the iron-beaked pheasant. It was slender and straight with a light purple body. Its blade was as thin as a cicada's wing, and it was named Purple Pheasant by Lin Sun with a dazzling cold light. The swallow-wing knife was bought by Lin Sun from a weapon shop in the city tonight. It was made of the spiritual material Rosy Cloud steel. Because there was no spiritual tattoo, it could only be regarded as an ordinary weapon. The plate of spiritual ink was Red Fire Spiritual Ink, one of the most widely circulated spiritual inks in the market. It could be used to inscribe more than 10 kinds of basic spiritual tattoos of fire property. What Lin Sun needed to do now was to inscribe an explosive flame spiritual tattoo on the swallow-wing knife to transform it from an ordinary weapon to a spiritual weapon. This was one of the most effective ways Lin Sun could think of to make money at present. Chapter 67. Qi. Holding the brush in his palm, Lin Sun sent a wisp of spiritual energy along the slim and straight lavender body to the sharp tip of the brush. Suddenly, a wisp of light as fine as a cow's hair was condensed at the tip of the brush. With a nimble movement of his wrist, The tip of the brush plunged into a plate of bright red spiritual ink. In an instant, all the spiritual ink was absorbed. The wisp of light at the tip of the purple pheasant inscribing brush was burning like a flame, revealing a bloody red light. These two steps were called drawing spirit into the brush and drawing ink as the source. The test was the compatibility between the spiritual energy and the inscribing brush. The better the quality of the inscribing brush, the more sensitive it would be to guide the spiritual energy, and the fuller the spiritual ink would be. At this moment, Lin Sun sat in front of the desk with a solemn look on his face. His back was as straight as a spear, and he gazed at the swallow-wing saber on the desk with his deep black eyes. Without hesitation, he lifted the brush and dropped the ink. The tip of the brush, like a sharp blade, suddenly moved on the bright and clean surface of the swallow-wing saber, making a sweet and subtle rustling sound. Strands of crimson veins that were as fine as hair flowed out from the tip of the brush, like ink blooming in a clear river. It was light and graceful, with a kind of mysterious beauty. Lin Sun's wrist was like a nimble snake, controlling the tip of the brush in his palm to draw with precise, clean and smooth movements. Although this was the first time in his life that Lin Sun really inscribed spiritual tattoos, he didn't feel nervous at all, because he had practiced this for countless times in the past years. He had already memorized the details of each spiritual tattoo and the key to each stroke of the brush. These were all learned from Master Lu since he was a child. At that time, he dealt with all kinds of basic spiritual tattoos every day. The secrets hidden deep under the complicated patterns had been discovered and mastered by Lin Sun a long time ago. The explosive flame spiritual tattoo, inscribed in front of him, was one of the basic spiritual tattoos. When he killed Lian Rufeng and others at the entrance of Feiyun village, the arrows were inscribed with explosive flame spiritual tattoo. But this time, the explosive flame spiritual tattoo was different, because this time he was going to refine a real spiritual weapon. What was a spiritual weapon? It was a treasure that could completely match the Ling power of the Xiuzhe and unleash great power. The only difference between spiritual weapons and ordinary weapons was that spiritual weapons had spiritual tattoo patterns, which gave them incredible power. The explosive flame spirit pattern, that was engraved on the arrow last time, was only a semi-finished product. The quality of the spirit ink used could only be considered normal. This kind of arrow would be completely useless after one use, so it could only be considered a semi-spirit weapon. This time, Lin specially bought a swallow-wing saber and a plate of high-quality, red fire spiritual ink. The explosive flame spiritual tattoo to be inscribed must be complete, rigorous and completely integrated with the material of the swallow-wing saber. Only in this way could it be called a true totem, and only in this way could it be used by cultivators to display great power. Although Lin Sun had already memorized all the mysteries of the explosive flame spiritual tattoo and practiced it countless times in order to inscribe this spiritual tattoo, he still dared not be careless at this moment. The reason was very simple. The process of refining a spiritual weapon seemed simple. All it needed was a carrier, namely a weapon, and then inscribe the spiritual tattoo pattern on it. But when it came to refining, there were extremely harsh requirements. It was universally acknowledged that to refine a spiritual weapon, a spiritual tattooist must have the cultivation of Gang spirit realm in order to support the inscribing of a complete spiritual tattoo pattern. Otherwise, the inscribing of the spiritual tattoo would be stopped halfway due to the lack of spiritual energy. Naturally, it was impossible to refine a real spiritual weapon. Lin Sun now only had the cultivation of marrow cleansing, the 5th level of martial realm, which was far from the Gang spirit realm. Fortunately, inscribing spiritual tattoo was not a test of cultivation, but the amount of spiritual energy in the body, which made Lin Sun, who had a strong foundation of spiritual energy, make up for this shortcoming. Speaking of which, the spiritual energy in Lin Sun's body was indeed huge, strong and pure without any impurities, all thanks to the 4 spiritual vortexes on the heart vessel and 4 acupoints. After being refined by the spiritual vortexes for 4 times, it could be said that Lin Sun's cultivation was no different from that of other practitioners on the 5th level of martial realm, but the purity and strength of the spiritual energy in his body was far beyond that of others. This was also the reason why Lin Sun dared to refine a spiritual weapon even though he was only on the 5th level of martial realm. Chi-Chi, swallowing and spitting flames, the tip of the brush kept inscribing, leaving fine and dense red lines on the surface of the swallowing saber. As time went by, Lin Sun's soul perception and spiritual energy were perfectly integrated on the purple pheasant inscribing brush in his palm. While the spiritual energy in his body was constantly being consumed as time went by, it was far from the point where he could not make ends meet. Lin Sun, who was concentrating on inscribing spiritual tattoo patterns, didn't notice that the surface of the gate to heaven floating quietly in his sea of consciousness suddenly flashed with a light, and then it instantly became calm again. At the same time, Lin Sun just finished the last line of the explosive flame spiritual tattoo. When the tip of the brush fell, a wisp of imperceptible breath quietly condensed in the tip of the brush. At this moment, Lin Sun felt as if his wrist was grasped by an invisible hand. Without any hesitation, he subconsciously turned the tip of the brush, and the last line came out of his hand so naturally and without any sluggishness. But when he raised his wrist and looked at the completed explosive flame spiritual tattoo, Lin Sun couldn't help but be stunned. It looked exactly the same as the one he was familiar with, but he always felt that there was a trace of unspeakable strangeness in this explosive flame spiritual tattoo. Was there something wrong with his mind? Before Lin Sun could perceive it carefully, he heard a buzzing sound. The surface of the swallowing saber, which used to be bright and clean, suddenly burst with dazzling light as if it was breathing, and then immediately became calm again. Looking at the surface of the swallowing saber, there was a touch of flame-like red light. Compared with the past, it had more compelling spirituality and dazzling sharpness. Seeing this scene, Lin Sun was immediately overwhelmed with endless joy. Without thinking about anything else, he raised his hand and picked up the saber. Boom! When the spiritual energy poured in, the swallowing saber suddenly burst into a dazzling light, illuminating the whole room. With a slight wave of the saber, Lin Sun could even hear bursts of explosions, like the eruption of magma and the explosion of flames. It was really a success. Lin Sun's eyes brightened, and he couldn't help but be in a trance. He was sure that the swallowing saber had transformed from an ordinary weapon into a real spiritual weapon. There was no doubt about it. Lin Sun didn't expect that he would succeed in refining a spiritual weapon for the first time in his life. Master Lu once said that no matter which spiritual tattooist refined a spiritual weapon, he would inevitably face the test of failure. Even the most experienced spiritual tattooist couldn't guarantee that he could refine a spiritual weapon at one time. In other words, it was normal to fail in refining a spiritual weapon, and it was abnormal not to fail. Why were spiritual weapons so expensive in today's market? The reason was that behind the refining of each spiritual weapon, there were often many failures, and each failure not only wasted spiritual materials and spiritual ink, but also the efforts of the spiritual tattooist. Generally speaking, in the eyes of all spiritual tattooists in the world, it was impossible for a spiritual apprentice at the 5th level of martial realm like Lin Sun to refine a spiritual weapon at all. But now, Lin Sun not only refined a spiritual weapon, but also succeeded on the first time. Lin Sun couldn't help but be in a trance because of this sudden success. In order to refine a spiritual weapon this time, he had prepared 3 portions of spiritual ink and 3 swallowing sabers, in order to have another chance in case of failure. Who would have thought that all these preparations were in vain? It was so unexpected. Lin Sun stared at the swallowing saber, no, it should be called explosive flame saber, now in a daze. Who could imagine that he, a spiritual apprentice at the 5th level of martial realm, could not only refine a spiritual weapon, but also succeed on the first time. If other spiritual tattooists in the world knew it, how would they feel? Thinking about it, Lin soon couldn't help but show a playful smile, but finally he shook his head and made up his mind that unless he was beaten to death, he would never disclose this matter. Lin soon had long understood that the tallest tree in the forest would be destroyed by the wind. If this matter was known by others, it was bound to cause many unexpected disturbances. In the future, I will rely on you to make a fortune. Staring at the explosive flame saber, Lin soon murmured to himself. He had made up his mind to sell this saber tomorrow. In order to refine a spiritual weapon, Lin soon spent 60 silver coins just to buy 3 swallowing sabers and 3 plates of red fire spiritual ink. Plus the 30 silver coins he spent on renting a house and the money he spent on eating and drinking for the past 7 days, Lin soon only had about 130 silver coins left from the original 300 silver coins he brought with him. If he didn't make money as soon as possible, it wouldn't take long for him to become poor. Fortunately, the explosive flame saber had been refined, which was a spiritual weapon and could be sold at a good price. Although Lin soon didn't know the specific market price, he knew that even the worst spiritual weapon was worth more than 50 silver coins. This saber is more powerful than your saber. Are you really going to sell it? Xia Zhi's voice sounded. Lin soon was surprised to find that Xia Zhi hadn't fallen asleep even though it was early in the morning. She had been sitting beside him all the time, which was rare. This is a spiritual weapon. Only in the hands of Gang's spirit realm practitioners can its full power be exerted. Lin Sun said casually, "Of course, even if we don't talk about this, if I use this explosive flame saber, I'm sure I can exert more power than if I use sky-breaching saber. After all, it's a spiritual weapon, not an ordinary one." Speaking of this, Lin Sun couldn't help sighing. It's a pity that we need money now, so we can only sell it first. If I have a chance later, I will refine one for myself. Xia Zhi said thoughtfully, "But I think the material of your saber is very strange. You'd better not lose it." Lin Sun couldn't help being moved. Of course, he knew that sky-breaching saber was extraordinary. It was a self-defense weapon given to him by Master Lu. According to Master Lu, the spiritual material used to cast this saber was so rare that even Master Lu himself couldn't inscribe spiritual tattoos on it. It could be imagined that the material of sky-breaching saber was unique. Since it hadn't been refined into a spiritual weapon, the unique material of sky-breaching saber had been buried. Chapter 68. The next morning. Before dawn, Lin Sun had already got up and walked into the courtyard, practicing marching boxing casually. The wind generated by his fists was like a howling wind, shaking up waves in the air. Although marching boxing was a basic boxing method widely spread in the empire, few people could practice it to such a high level like Lin Sun. It was a pity that he still hadn't reached the level of mastery. He had mastered the essence and general trend of the boxing method, but he lacked a unique spirit, which belonged to his own martial style. Lin Sun knew clearly that if he wanted to make a breakthrough, he must go through a real battle and temper the spirit of the boxing method with blood and fire. After practicing for 30 minutes, when all his qi and blood were roaring like boiling water, Lin Sun stopped. He hurriedly washed his face and rinsed his mouth. After breakfast with Xia Zhi, he pushed the door open and went out alone with a bag on his back. Today he was going to sell the explosive flame saber he had refined last night. Xia Zhi was left at home by Lin Sun. The little girl was not interested in anything in Donglin town except reading. Lin Sun bought a lot of books for her these days, which were enough for her to read for many days. Even in the early morning, the civilian area was still quite gloomy, with intricate dilapidated buildings built randomly, forming long and narrow alleys like cobwebs. Walking in it was like walking in a maze. Fortunately, Lin Sun had a good memory, so he didn't get lost. But after walking for a short time, he seemed to notice something and stopped at once, saying, "My two friends, if you don't come out, don't blame me for being rude." Before his voice died away, two figures hurriedly walked out from the corner of the alley on one side. They were two men, one fat and one thin. As soon as they came out, the fat one shouted, "Young master, please calm down. We've been waiting here because we have something to discuss with you." Lin soon raised his eyebrows. "What's the matter?" The fat one hesitated and glanced at the thin one beside him. The skinny man rolled his eyes and said with a flattering smile, "Young master, to tell you the truth, ever since you killed Snake Boss a few days ago, some people have started to break the rules. All kinds of dirty things have happened, causing many brothers and sisters who live nearby to be angry but dare not say anything." Lin Sun didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It was ridiculous that these two guys dared to complain that others did dirty things at first sight. The two of us were thinking that we couldn't afford to lose a leader in this area. So, we wanted to invite you, young master, to come out and hold the fort. The skinny man said quickly, "Of course, I won't let you work for nothing. According to the usual practice, as long as you are a beggar in this area, you will be given a sum of money every month. What do you think?" Lin Sun finally understood that these two guys wanted him to play the role of boss in a sense. But he was not interested in it, and he was even more disinclined to associate himself with the likes of ruffians, hooligans, thieves, and murderers. "Sorry, I'm not interested," Lin Sun said and walked away. Young master, young master." The fat one was so anxious that he wanted to stop Lin Sun. But when his eyes met Lin Sun's eyes, he suddenly trembled all over, feeling as if he was stabbed by a blade, and dared not to move again. "You two go. I said I'm not interested in it, so I will never intervene in this kind of thing," Lin Sun said lightly and soon disappeared in the depth of the alley. Seeing this, the fat one and the thin one were both depressed and sighed. "Fatty Diao, what should we do? I don't want to rely on Boss Bear. Because of Snake Boss, I offended a relative of Boss Bear," the thin one said with a sad face. "Damn, since Snake Boss died, Boss Bear has been eager to take action and wants to put his hands in our area. He's going too far." Fatty Diao gnashed his teeth and said, "But it's a pity that this young master doesn't want to get involved. Alas, I don't know what to do now." This civilian district was very large, covering an area of dozens of miles. There were at least 100,000 people living here. Most of them were nobodies at the bottom of society. There were many people from all walks of life, thieves, ruffians, murderers, prostitutes. There were all kinds of people here. Naturally, gangs and gangs were born. It could be said that the order of the underground in the entire civilian area was completely controlled by more than 20 gangs. Each gang controlled an area, and there were often fights for territory. For example, Snake Boss, who was killed by Lin Sun a few days ago, was originally a gang leader in this area. As for Boss Bear, he was a gang leader in another area. But now, with the death of Snake Boss, Boss Bear seized the opportunity to encroach on the underground forces in this area. "Damn, let's rely on Boss Liu." The thin one gnashed his teeth and said, "Boss Liu is now the strongest of all the forces. Bones, are you muddle-headed? Boss Liu is greedy. If you follow him, be careful that Dark is involved." Fatty Diao shook his head repeatedly. The thin one called Bones smiled bitterly and said, "Then what do you think we should do?" At this time, a light voice came from a distance. "Why don't you rely on me?" With the voice, a delicate and young figure appeared, wearing a black windbreaker with a hat covering her face. Obviously, she was Xia Ji, who was left at home to read books by Lin Sun. "You?" Fatty Diao was stunned. The figure looked mysterious, but it was just a kid. Fatty Diao's face darkened. He grinned hideously and said, "Kiddo, how dare you make fun of me in broad daylight? Are you tired of living, Bang?" Before his voice died away, Fatty Diao felt that his chest was hit by a giant hammer. He flew backward uncontrollably and fell hard on the ground. All his bones were almost broken, and he screamed. The bones was dumbfounded. He didn't see it clearly, but Fatty Diao was flying out. Xia Ji stepped forward, and her indifferent voice was filled with an undeniable coldness. From now on, I am the boss of this area, and you are my subordinates. Do you have any objection? The bones trembled all over. Although he might be facing a child, he couldn't help but feel a touch of fear in his heart. He shook his head repeatedly and said, "No, no. What about you?" Xia Ji looked at Fatty Diao. Fatty Diao's scream stopped abruptly. He suddenly climbed up and shouted, "Absolutely no objection. From now on, we are your loyal subordinate. We will go through fire and water for you without hesitation." Bang! Xia Ji raised her palm and slapped Fatty Diao's face across the air. He screamed and fell down like a gourd. Then, Xia Ji said, "I don't like to listen to nonsense. You only need to follow me and obey my orders. Meritorious deeds will be rewarded, and mistakes will be punished. Do you understand?" "Yes." The fat man and the thin man were completely awed and nodded repeatedly. "Well, you go now and tell all your companions in this area that I am your boss from now on." Xia Ji nodded and turned to leave. Seeing this, Fatty Diao breathed out a long turbid breath with a look of lingering fear. Then he seemed to think of something and shouted, "Boss!" Xia Ji stopped. "Anything else?" Fatty Diao trembled all over and said repeatedly, "I just want to know, what should I call you?" Xia Ji suddenly fell into silence, and said after a long time, "Shuang Mu." "Shuang Mu?" Fatty Diao and the bones looked at each other and made a mental note of it. Until Xia Ji's figure disappeared, the bones whispered, "Are we really going to serve this boss Shuang Mu?" Fatty Diao touched his red and swollen cheek and gasped, "Idiot, didn't you see the slap I just got just now? He hit me across the air. Damn it, only practitioners in the gang spirit realm can do that. Now in this civilian area, there are only 5 or 6 people who can do that, right?" The bones immediately reacted and said happily, "Now we are saved. Boss Xiong is only at the 8th level of martial realm. How can he compare with our boss Shuang Mu?" Fatty Diao also became complacent. "Although our boss Shuang Mu looks like a child, he is actually a master. If we follow him in the future, maybe we can really make a name for ourselves." The bones also said excitedly, "Then what are we waiting for? Tell others about it and say that we have a new boss." Fatty Diao nodded repeatedly. If Lin Sun saw this scene, it was unknown what he would think. In the center of the 800 Avenue. This was the most prosperous core area of Donglin Town, with tall buildings rising from the ground. The buildings were antique, with green bricks and yellow tiles and carved beams and painted pillars, which were very magnificent. The bustling crowd shuttled back and forth here, each of them dressed in gorgeous clothes, full of style. When Lin Sun arrived here, wearing coarse linen clothes and carrying a bag on his shoulder, he seemed a little conspicuous. From time to time, he could get some disgusted and disdainful eyes. Many young and beautiful women directly avoided him as soon as they saw him. This was not an exaggeration. The 800 Street was the most prosperous money-squandering establishment in the city. The shops, restaurants, and inns that were set up there were not places that ordinary people could spend their money on. Therefore, the people who could come and go in this area were mostly people from well-to-do families. Lin Sun's simple and clean dress became a symbol of poverty in the eyes of others. Lin Sun himself seemed to be unaware of this. He raised his head and looked into the distance, where there was a towering building of dozens of meters high. Keystone business. Lin Sun thought for a while and finally walked in. In the Green Sun tribe, although Mu Wansu's attitude towards Lin Sun was a little bad, she still helped Lin Sun a lot. At this time, if he wanted to sell a spiritual weapon, it was reasonable for him to choose Keystone business first. Besides, Lin Sun would not only sell this spiritual weapon, but also refine and sell more spiritual weapons in the future. He believed that Keystone business would be very interested in it, and maybe they would start a long-term cooperation with him. After all, which merchant would refuse such benefits that were delivered to their doorstep? In any case, Lin Sun could give such benefits to Keystone Business at the first time out of the thought of repaying the kindness, rather than coveting more profit. Chapter 69. Compared with Keystone Business in Donglin Town, Keystone Business in Green Sun Tribe was inconspicuous. As soon as Lin Sun entered it, he felt like he had entered a magnificent palace. It was not only spacious, but also decorated with antique and exquisite antique decorations. Beautiful waitresses, like butterflies flying through flowers, walked beside every guest with a warm smile on their faces, neither humble nor arrogant. Even when they entertained Lin Sun, who was dressed plainly and simply, they were polite and impeccable in etiquette. The waitress took Lin Sun to the exchange area. Before long, an appraiser who called himself Wang came over and talked with Lin Sun for a while. Then he took the explosive flame saber and looked it up and down carefully. After a long time, Wang Lin raised his head and praised, "This explosive flame saber is of good quality. It can be regarded as the best among the low-grade spiritual weapons of human rank. Child, are you really going to sell this treasure?" Lin Sun nodded with a smile. Wang Lin thought for a moment and said, "This treasure is worth 40 imperial silver coins. Are you satisfied with the price?" Lin Sun had just checked at the counter of Keystone Business. The price of a low-grade spiritual weapon of human rank was roughly between 30 imperial silver coins to 80 imperial silver coins. From this point of view, the price offered by Wang Lin was not very high, but not low either. Lin Sun didn't care about this. He was here to reach a long-term cooperation with Keystone Business, which could be regarded as a repayment. However, at this time, a maid hurriedly came over. She invited Wang Lin to the side and whispered something to him. Very quickly, Wang Lin returned and said apologetically, "Young master, please wait a moment. There is an urgent matter that I need to deal with." Lin Sun nodded. Wang Lin left in a hurry. He didn't let Lin wait for long before he returned. However, he seemed to have something on his mind and was a little absent-minded. Lin Sun thought for a moment and took the initiative to say, "Brother Wang, this spiritual weapon." Before Lin Sun finished, Wang Lin waved his hand and said, "Sorry, Keystone Business won't do this business anymore. Please forgive us, child." "Won't do it anymore?" Lin Sun raised his eyebrows and felt a little surprised. Why did this guy's attitude change so much after he left? "Sorry, please forgive us, child." Wang Lin's expression also became indifferent, which made Lin's heart sink. He vaguely guessed something. Suppressing his displeasure, he stood up and said, "If so, I won't bother you any more. Take care, young master. I won't see you out." Wang Lin's voice was cold and distant. Lin suddenly asked, "Did Mu Wansu ask you to do this?" Wang Lin was stunned. His face slightly changed as he asked, "Young master, what do you mean?" Lin Sun saw his expression and knew the answer in his heart. He couldn't help shaking his head. "Forget it." Without any hesitation, Zhang Xian left with large strides. Wang Lin sat in a daze for a long time. Finally, he let out a long sigh and stood up to leave. On the bustling street, Lin Sun turned his head and glanced at the magnificent and towering building of Keystone Business, with a smile on his lip. Lin knew that Mu Wansu had always disliked him. Especially after he suppressed Wu Business with the help of Yanjun last time, Mu Wansu disliked him more and more. But no matter what, he owed Keystone Business a favor, which could be regarded as Shi Xuan's or Mu Wansu's. Therefore, Lin Sun wouldn't resent Mu Wansu for being rejected today. It was just a business. Since Mu Wansu didn't want it, he would sell it to others. Mu Wansu is really vengeful. Isn't she worried that I would be shameless enough to harass her again and again with Shi Xuan's token? What could she do to me at that time? It's a pity that I'm not thick-skinned enough. Lin Sun shook his head with some self-mockery. Well, judging from her attitude, I'm afraid she intends to draw a line with me. In that case, I'll stay away from keystone business in the future. Lin soon stopped thinking about it and began to walk along the 800 Avenue, observing the various shops on both sides of the street. But soon, someone took the initiative to find Lin soon. It was a plain-looking man, but his behavior was quite capable and calm. Child, if I'm not mistaken, you just went to keystone business to sell the treasures, right? The man cupped his hands with a smile, and his voice was gentle and clear, giving people a comfortable feeling like a spring breeze. This was the temperament of a person, which was inadvertently revealed from his speech and behavior, which made this plain-looking man more amiable and difficult to make people feel disgusted. Exactly. Lin Sun nodded. Let me guess again. You must feel that the price offered by keystone business is not right, so you didn't make the deal in the end, right? The man continued, with a clear voice and a warm smile. Yes. Lin Sun nodded again. He just entered keystone business with a bag and came out with a bag. Anyone could see this if they paid attention to it. The man smiled and introduced himself. I'm Gu Yanping. Now I have opened a shop called Golden Hall. If you don't mind, would you like to have a chat in my shop? Lin Sun also smiled. Shopkeeper Gu, how dare I refuse your kind invitation? Both of them smiled brightly. Golden Hall was located at the west end of the 800 Avenue. Compared with the prosperity of the central area, this area was relatively deserted. The shop of Golden Hall was not big. It was just a two-story building with green tiles. But when you walked in, you found that although this shop could not be compared with keystone business, it was neat and elegant, and ingenuity could be seen everywhere. But the only embarrassing thing was that when Lin Sun walked in, he found that there was no customer in the whole Golden Hall except himself. Gu Yanping looked calm and said with a smile, My shop has been open for only dozens of days, so there are few customers. Sorry to make you laugh at me. From Lin Sun's point of view, the goods sold in the shops could only be described as scarce and scarce. Some of the counters were even empty, with only the names of the items they were selling marked on them. If an ordinary person entered this shop, they would have some doubts. Could it be that this shop was an empty shell? From this point, Lin Sun roughly judged that Golden Fish Pond could not compare with other businesses in terms of financial resources and background. The only advantage it had was that this shop was located on the 800 Avenue. However, what Gu Yanping said next greatly surprised Lin Sun. Gu Yanping looked calm and said frankly, Child, I know you have a lot of doubts in your mind. To tell you the truth, even this shop is rented by me. And with my financial resources, I can only pay for half a year's rent. Lin Sun was stunned and said after a while, Shopkeeper Gu, why do you tell me this? Gu Yanping said seriously, Integrity is the most important thing in business, and the biggest advantage I have now is integrity. If I want to develop Golden Hall in the future, it is also inseparable from integrity, so I dare not hide it from you, young master. Lin Sun nodded. He suddenly found that Gu Yanping was a wonderful person. From the very beginning, Gu Yanping had shown extraordinary observation skills. His way of receiving guests was also quite good. He was sincere but particular, which made people unable to dislike him at all. In that case, please have a look at this saber, Shopkeeper Gu. Lin Sun took out the explosive flame saber and handed it over. Gu Yanping gladly accepted the order. He took the explosive flame saber and looked at it carefully for a long time. Then he nodded and said, It's a top-grade spiritual weapon of lower grade of human rank, worth between 200 and 300 imperial silver coins. Lin Sun thought of Wang Lin's evaluation in keystone business and couldn't help nodding. It showed that Gu Yanping was also good at appraising treasures. He said casually, 40 imperial silver coins, and this saber is yours. Gu Yanping didn't expect Lin Sun to be so straightforward. After thinking for a while, he said decisively, Thank you, child. But business is business. My offer is 50 imperial silver coins. As he said, He took out a money bag and took out 50 imperial silver coins, handing them to Lin Sun. "Please accept it, child." Lin Sun put them away silently and said, "Shopkeeper Gu, now I believe that you are sincere in doing business with me. If I sell any spiritual weapons in the future, Golden Hall will be my first choice." Gu Yinping smiled and cupped his hands. "Thank you for taking care of my shop, child." Lin Sun nodded and then left. "Father, we don't have much money in our account." As soon as Lin Sun left, a teenager came out and said helplessly, "Why do you still spend so much money? I think it won't take long for our shop to close down." The young man's name was Gu Liang, and he was the only son of Gu Yanping. When he heard this, he said disapprovingly, "Liang, remember, in the path of doing business, not only does it require boldness and long-term vision, it also requires the courage to cut off all means of retreat." After a pause, Gu Yanping looked resolute and said, "With the resources we have now, if we maintain the business by normal means, there is no way to survive at all. Therefore, we must boldly fight for it. If we succeed, Golden Hall can completely establish a foothold in the 800th Street." Gu Liang couldn't help asking, "What if we fail?" Gu Yanping was silent for a long time, and then he said indifferently, "Then I'll pack up and leave. Since I was expelled from my family by those old guys in Sursa City, I thoroughly understand one thing. If I want to do something, I must rely on myself." As he said this, he picked up the explosive flame saber and walked into the inner chamber. At the mention of being expelled from his family, Gu Liang's eyes suddenly flashed with a fiery anger, which immediately turned into calmness. In the inner chamber, Gu Yanping's expression was focused and composed. He stood there casually with his left hand holding up the saber, and he seemed to have become a different person. His eyes were filled with absolute confidence, as if everything was within his grasp, and this caused his mediocre appearance to carry a wisp of strange charm. All of a sudden, the 5 fingers of Gu Yanping's right hand, like a blooming lotus, interlocked layer by layer, instantly pinched a strange handprint, and gently printed it on the surface of the explosive flame saber. Clang! With a clear sound, the surface of the saber was suddenly covered with a flame boiling like lava, burning fiercely, dispelling the darkness in the inner chamber, and making Gu Yanping's face red. "Good saber." Although it was a compliment, his expression was calm and indifferent, without any ripples, as if he had been used to this kind of scene. At the same time, the 5 fingers of his right hand changed again, and his fingertips hit the surface of the explosive flame saber in a unique rhythm like playing a zither. Boom! On the sharp tip of the saber, a brilliant saber light like red sunset suddenly burst out, constantly swallowing and spitting, flashing an extremely dangerous breath. Good saber. Chapter 70. Gu Liang was waiting quietly. 2 hours had passed, but there was no movement in the inner chamber, which made Gu Liang confused. Since the opening of Golden Hall, his father, Gu Yanping, had purchased 7 treasures, including spiritual armors, spiritual spears, and spiritual swords, all of which were combat spiritual weapons. However, the quality of these spiritual weapons was not satisfactory, and the quality could only be regarded as average. Besides, they were very common spiritual weapons on the market, so they had not been sold so far. This made Gu Liang doubt whether his father's method was feasible. What worried Gu Liang the most was that just the cost of renting this shop, in addition to the money spent to buy the 7 spirit weapons, was about to exhaust all of their savings. If this situation continued, it would not take many days for Golden Hall to completely close down. At that time, "I'm afraid I can only pack up and leave with my tail between my legs, right?" Gu Liang sighed in his heart, but he had admired his father since he was a child. Therefore, although he questioned his father's method, he had never strongly opposed it. "Well, it's no big deal to leave. As long as I don't starve to death, there will be a day when I make a comeback." Gu Liang took a deep breath and abandoned the distractions in his mind. Inheriting many advantages of Gu Yanping, he knew that in some things, one should do one's best and leave it to fate. Worrying too much would make one's mind chaotic. At this moment, the door of the inner chamber was pushed open and Gu Yanping came out. To Gu Liang's surprise, his father in front of him seemed to have become another person, full of joy and radiance, as if he had become many years younger in an instant. "Liang, it's time for us to make a comeback." Gu Yanping laughed. "Father, what do you mean?" Gu Liang was puzzled. "The explosive flame saber that child just used is extraordinary." Gu Yanping couldn't help being excited when he thought of his own verification. Its power is about 20% stronger than that of other explosive flame sabers. 20%. A low-grade human-rank spiritual weapon has the power of a middle-grade human-rank spiritual weapon. Which explosive flame saber can compare with it in the world? Gu Liang's body trembled, and he was a little surprised. Is it really 20% more power? As far as he knew, explosive flame saber was also a very common spiritual weapon on the market. Even the best explosive flame saber could not increase its power by 20% out of thin air. Explosive flame saber was refined by a spiritual tattooist, so its material and spiritual tattoo pattern had long been fixed and could not be changed at all. This also meant that the power of the explosive flame saber could no longer have a breakthrough. Otherwise, it wouldn't be an explosive flame saber. That was why Gu Liang was surprised when he heard Gu Yanping's words. Gu Yanping understood this very well. Even he was shocked when he received the result just now, thinking that his eyes were playing tricks on him. But the facts proved that all of this was true. "Liang when I appraise treasures, I use the flying spirit treasure seeking technique. You should understand what it means," Gu Yanping casually explained. Gu Liang was completely stunned. Flying spirit treasure seeking technique. This was a secret technique passed down by their ancestors. It was a secret technique that was specially used to appraise treasures. Ever since their ancestors had used this technique to appraise treasures, there had never been a single mistake. This is actually real. Gu Liang couldn't help but be in a trance. An ordinary explosive flame saber's power can soar by 20%. If the spiritual tattooists in the world hear this, I'm afraid it will cause a great disturbance. Gu Yanping also sighed with emotion. I don't know who refined this treasure. It's a pity that the child left in a hurry at that time. Otherwise we could inquire about it. Gu Liang laughed. Father, I'm afraid that the person who refined such a treasure is a spiritual tattooist with extraordinary attainments, or even a spiritual tattooist grandmaster. It's not easy to see such a person. Gu Yanping pondered for a long time, but shook his head and said, Let's not talk about this. Go and contact some people to spread the news for me. Let's say that Golden Hall accidentally obtained a peerless saber. Who in the world can get it? We must shout out this slogan. Gu Liang rolled his eyes and smiled like a little fox. Peerless saber? Gu Yanping also laughed. Isn't it? This slogan is just a gimmick often used by merchants to arouse some criticism. This way they can attract more attention. Gu Liang nodded and said, Leave it to me. Gu Yanping's eyes were full of confidence and heroism. Whether Golden Hall can gain a firm foothold in Donglin Town depends on whether this shot can make a big impact. Keystone business. After Lin Sun left, Wang Lin hurriedly walked into the depths of the hall and walked into a quiet and secluded courtyard after a few turns. In the courtyard there were waterside pavilions, small bridges and flowing water. Mu Wansu, in a black dress, sat lazily in a pavilion and was looking through an account book. Her black hair was coiled into a bun, revealing a snow-white goose neck. Her side face was as white as mutton fat jade, outlining a stunning arc in the warm sunshine. It had to be said that Mu Wansu was indeed a rare beauty. But when Wang Lin walked into the courtyard, he dared not look up at Mu Wansu. He bowed his head and said respectfully, Miss Wansu, Lin Sun has retreated in the face of difficulties. I thought he had understood the meaning of keystone business. Mu Wansu closed the account book in her hand, and a smile appeared on her full and ruddy red lips. she said slowly. I thought he could stay in Donglin Town for a few days. I didn't expect that in less than 10 days, he had to come to sell his spiritual weapon. It seems that he has understood that it is not so easy to gain a foothold in Donglin Town. Speaking of this, Mu Wansu suddenly asked, didn't he react at all? In Mu Wansu's view, Lin Sun was a cunning and shameless little bastard. How could he leave obediently after being refused at the door? Wang Lin was stunned and said, he seemed to know that all this was arranged by you, miss, so he didn't show any emotion when he left. Hearing this, Mu Wansu inexplicably felt something wrong in her heart. But she immediately shook her head disapprovingly, thinking that she had worried too much. Since the first day Lin Sun entered Donglin Town, she had seen all his actions. She knew that Lin Sun had to live in the dirty and chaotic place known as the slum, because he was short of money. She also knew that he seemed to be thinking about how to gain a foothold in Donglin Town. Originally, Mu Wansu thought that although this cunning and shameless young man was not a good person, his means were quite good. Maybe he could really survive in Donglin Town by his own means. But today, when she learned that Lin Sun came to Keystone Business with a spiritual weapon to sell, Mu Wansu immediately realized that this boy might be desperate and couldn't hold on any longer. Otherwise, how could a practitioner in martial realm like him be willing to sell a spiritual weapon? This made Mu Wansu feel happy and gloat at the same time. Was this the person the young master had taken a fancy to? Without the help of Keystone Business, Lin Sun was too useless to make a move in Donglin Town. If the young master knew this, what would he think? Miss Wansu, I see that the treasures Lin Sun sells are extraordinary in appearance. I'm afraid there are many secrets in them. It's a pity to miss them. Wang Lin didn't understand Mu Wansu's mind. As a treasure appraiser, what he cared about was related to what he was good at. It's just a low-grade spiritual weapon of human rank. What's the big deal? Mu Wansu didn't take it seriously. But according to my observation, although the grade of this explosive flame saber is not worth mentioning, its appearance seems to be different from other explosive flame sabers, Wang Lin said quickly. Mu Wansu frowned and said, no matter how different it is, it's just an explosive flame saber. Why are you so persistent? You can leave now. Wang Lin sighed in his heart, shook his head and turned away. Little bastard, after you sell the spiritual weapon, let's see what else you can sell. Keystone Business won't let you take advantage of us anymore. Mu Wansu smiled gently and continued to review the accounts. For her, what happened just now was just a trifle, not worthy of too much attention. What she really wanted to know was how many days Lin Sun could stay in Donglin Town. Lin Sun didn't know what happened in Keystone Business after he left, nor did he know that Gu Yanping and his son were now full of ambition and eager to show off their skills. After selling the explosive flame saber and getting 50 imperial silver coins, Lin Sun began to browse in the 800 street with a happy mood. A swallowing saber and a plate of red fire spiritual ink were worth 20 imperial silver coins, but the explosive flame saber refined by Lin Sun was sold for 50 imperial silver coins, more than double the original price. Most importantly, he would be able to continuously refine more spiritual weapons in the future. This was the fundamental reason why Lin Sun was in a good mood, as if he had seen a glittering road to wealth under his feet. When I have enough money, maybe I should buy some blood-refining pills to prepare for breaking through to the 6th level of martial realm. Lin Sun calculated quickly. He had seen the blood-refining elixir in Keystone Business of Green Sun Tribe. It was an extremely precious elixir. It was said that it was refined from hundreds of spiritual herbs, and one elixir was worth 10 silver coins. It was extremely expensive, but it was normal. With the improvement of cultivation, the quality of the spiritual medicine needed by practitioners also increased, and the corresponding spiritual medicine was more expensive. For example, in the first level of martial realm, one only needed to eat some spiritual grains and spiritual vegetables, but when one wanted to advance to a higher level, the effect of spiritual grains and spiritual vegetables was far from enough. Moreover, Ling medicine was not only used to replenish Ling power. When a cultivator cultivated to different realms, the effects of the Ling medicine they needed were also different. What? A strange feeling suddenly arose in Lin Sun's heart, and he immediately woke up from his chaotic thoughts. He couldn't help turning his head to take a look, only to find that the nearby streets were bustling with pedestrians like water, and he didn't find anything unusual. Immediately, Lin Sun shook his head, turned around, and walked into the depths of an alley on one side of the street. Not long after Lin Sun's figure disappeared, two men with ordinary appearance and clothes suddenly walked out of the nearby crowd. They were no different from the passers-by on the street, but at this time, their eyes were fixed on the alley where Lin Sun left. "Old Dao, the target seems to have noticed us. Shall we continue to track him?" A dark-skinned man frowned. Chapter 71. The man called Old Dao pondered for a while and said decisively, "Go after him." The two of them walked into the alley in a flash. It was a civilian area nearby. The winding alleys crisscrossed like a spider-web maze, dark and damp. Old Dao didn't go far when they suddenly found that the figure of the target had disappeared. "Old dog, can you still smell that boy?" Old Dao frowned and asked. "It's not far ahead," the old dog answered quickly. Old Dao nodded and continued to move forward, but he felt a little uneasy. This alley was extremely narrow and long, less than 3 meters wide. It was deserted along the way. Even in broad daylight, it was extremely dark and damp. "Old dog, we have to be careful. Although it's perfectly justified to work for money, it's all in vain if you die." Old Dao felt something was wrong and couldn't help reminding Old Dao in a low voice. "Hey, he's just a little guy from a remote village. What's more, we're just following the target, not fighting him." Old Dog didn't take it seriously. "Anyway, it's better to be careful," Old Dao frowned. "Of course." Old Dog didn't take it seriously, and then he exclaimed, "How could this be?" The target's breath disappeared here. Old Dao was stunned, and then his heart suddenly thumped. He knew something was wrong. Bang! At this moment, a black shadow suddenly fell from the sky, as fast as a ghost. Old Dao felt dizzy, and then he saw Old Dog's body shake violently, as if he was struck by lightning, and then he knelt on the ground. "You're courting death." Old Dao reacted very quickly. With a roar, he pulled out his saber and chopped at the figure. The black shadow was Lin Sun. Before Old Saber attacked, he had already jumped into Old Saber's arms like a cannonball. At the same time, he stretched out his palms and fingers, grasped Old Saber's wrist joint like lightning, and shook it hard. Bang! The horrible power hit Old Dao's body like a tide, shaking his limbs and bones as if they were broken. All his strength collapsed, and blood spurted from his mouth and nose. Then, he fell to the ground with a bang. Dizzy and in pain, he could no longer stand up. This collision occurred abruptly, and then it ended in an instant. It was inconceivably swift, decisive, ruthless, and swift. It was also at this moment that Dagger finally saw the appearance of the attacker. It was their target. But Dagger had never imagined that a 13 or 14-year-old boy could be so ruthless and decisive, which was not something a teenager should have. Lin Sun stepped forward and said with a smile, "Tell me what I want to know. If you don't, I will ask him. If you cooperate well, I can let you die a quick death." He pointed at the unconscious old dog in the distance. His words made Dagger realize that the young man in front of him was not a fledgling at all. But Dagger refused to admit defeat. He gritted his teeth and said, "Do you know who we are?" Crack! Lin Sun smiled without saying a word, but crushed one of Dagger's palms with the tip of his foot. The flesh was badly mutilated, and the bones were all broken. Dagger was about to scream in pain when a stone was stuffed into his mouth. Looking at Dagger's ferocious and painful face, Lin Sun still looked warm and calm, and said softly, "Believe me, I have learned many ways to torture people since I was a child. There are more than 1,000 of them. If you want to have a try, you don't have to speak. Dagger's expression changed, and his body trembled because of the severe pain. His eyes were about to burst and bleed. He stared at the young man in front of him, and his heart was shaken. Crack! Lin Sun was still smiling, but under the tip of his foot, Dagger's other hand was completely destroyed. The pain made Dagger whimper, and his face twisted and hideous. This youth looked delicate, handsome, and warm, and had a harmless appearance. However, his experienced and efficient methods were even more ruthless than an executioner who was proficient in torture. He was not a young man, but a little devil. When Dagger saw Lin Sun squatting down, took out a pale cyan dagger, and was about to continue the torture, Dagger completely collapsed. Fear flooded his heart, and he couldn't help nodding crazily. Lin Sun smacked his lips with a little regret. I thought you would be a tough bone. Who would have thought that you couldn't stand it before the torture started? Hearing this, Dagger twitched all over. Hadn't the torture started? Lin Sun stopped smiling and looked at Dagger calmly. In this case, I won't embarrass you any further. I ask and you answer. I hope you don't lie to me. I will ask your companion to answer these questions again. If you two give different answers, you should know what the consequences will be. Dagger completely gave up and lost the ability to resist. He nodded. When Lin Sun came out from the other end of the alley, there were 2 dead bodies in the dark behind him. Maybe it wouldn't be long before they were devoured by passing wild dogs. Lin Sun didn't care about this at all. Carrying the candied fruits, spiritual fruits, roasted meat and various snacks he bought on the street, he walked leisurely towards his home. The warm sunset forced a ray of light through the high part of the alley, dispelling the darkness and plated the thin figure of the young man with a warm luster. Anyone who saw this handsome and warm young man on the outside would never think that he would use such a cruel and bloody method to end the lives of 2 people. This was Lin Sun. Growing up in a dark environment, he was destined to be different from his peers. Lian Fei, Clan of Wu, Lin Sun sorted out his thoughts along the way. Dagger and Old Dog had told him everything, which made Lin Sun realize that he had been targeted by Clan of Wu since the first day he entered Donglin town. This surprised Lin Sun. Clan of Wu was Wu Hinshui's family, and also the force behind Green Sun Tribe's Wu business. Lin Sun had thought that with Keystone Business's help, Clan of Wu would not dare to make trouble for him no matter how much they hated him. But now it seemed that they obviously didn't give up. According to Dagger, on the first day Lin Sun entered Donglin town, Clan of Wu found Lian Fei and carried out a secret plot. The content of the plot was very simple: to kill Lin Sun. However, Clan of Wu would not do it in person, but let Lian Fei take full responsibility for it. Clan of Wu would stand behind Lian Fei and provide him with all financial and resource support. This was what surprised Lin Sun. Lian Fei was the son of Lian Rufeng. But what Lin Sun didn't expect was that Clan of Wu would find Lian Fei and ask him to deal with him. But after thinking for a while, Lin Sun understood why Lian Fei agreed to do this. Lian Rufeng, his father, was killed by Lin Sun. As a son, how could Lian Fei not take revenge for his father's death? Driving the wolf to devour the tiger? Clan of Wu really has a good plan. Lin Sun sneered in his heart. It was obvious that Clan of Wu was still afraid of Keystone Business, so they didn't dare to deal with him openly and could only act through Lian Fei. For example, Dagger and Old Dog, who followed Lin Sun this time, were spies hired by Lian Fei. Their purpose was to collect all traces of Lin Sun so as to provide intelligence support for Lian Fei's next action. At the same time, according to Dagger, Lian Fei had recruited many bloodthirsty outlaws with the financial support of Clan of Wu. All of them valued money more than life. They were waiting for an opportunity to give Lin Sun a fatal blow. In this case, although Lin Sun was not afraid of Lian Fei, he couldn't help but feel a headache when he thought that they had been secretly planning to kill him and might appear at any time. How could one be a thief for 1,000 days and guard against a thief for 1,000 days? However, Lin soon learned that Lien Fei was 15 years old this year and had reached the 5th level of martial realm. He was now a student of Donglin School. According to Dagger, Lien Fei's mind was now on the county test in a month, so he hadn't killed Lin Sun yet. According to this information, Lin Sun could at least judge that if Lien Fei really wanted to kill him, he might do it after the county test in a month. But this was just Lin Sun's judgment. If Lien Fei knew that Lin Sun had discovered his plot, he might take action in advance. It seems that I have to hurry to collect some intelligence about Clan of Wu and Lien Fei. A killing intent surged in Lin Sun's heart. What he hated most was to be schemed against and framed. Since Clan of Wu still didn't give up, how could Lin Sun just sit still and wait for death? However, the current situation was that the enemy was in the dark while he was in the light. Lin Sun didn't know the specific situation of Clan of Wu, so the urgent task was to understand the enemy's actual situation and make a plan before taking action. While thinking, Lin Sun had unconsciously walked to the door of his house. He immediately dispelled the distracting thoughts and pushed the door open. Lin Sun suddenly saw 2 figures standing in the courtyard, one fat and one thin. His eyes suddenly became cold, and his killing intent burst out. Almost at the same time, the 2 men, one fat and one thin, also turned their heads and saw Lin Sun. A flattering smile appeared on their faces at once, but when they met Lin Sun's cold eyes that were as sharp as a blade, their faces froze and they couldn't help but tremble. "What are you doing here?" Lin Sun recognized these 2 people. They were Fatty Diao and the Bones. He immediately felt at ease and hid the killing intent in his eyes. At this time, Fatty Diao and the Bones also secretly breathed a sigh of relief. They bowed together and said loudly, "Greetings, Lord Shuangmu." Shuangmu, Lord? When he heard this title, Lin Sun couldn't help but be stunned. Wasn't this title too unpleasant to hear? Lin Sun glanced at him and then looked at the closed door. An idea came to his mind and he went straight in. After entering the room, he saw Xia Ji sitting at the desk, reading quietly. "What's going on outside?" Lin Sun asked. How could he not know that with Xia Ji here, it was impossible for Fatty Diao and the Bones to break into his house with their ability, unless Xia Ji let them in. "They are your subordinates." Xia Ji put down the book in her hand, thought for a moment, and said, "I wanted to be their leader, but later I felt it was a little troublesome. So, I give the title to you." Looking at the serious expression on the quiet and white face of the little girl, Lin Sun's face became gloomy. What he hated most was to let Xia Ji be contaminated with the dark and dirty things. But now, she took the initiative to get in touch with these dark things. How could she not learn bad things when she got involved with those ruffians, hooligans, rascals, murderers and gangsters?